you should suck out snake venom. This is one of the most commonly believed but completely wrong facts, that the safest response to a snake bite is to suck out the venom. The practice was promoted in survival manuals, dramatized in movies, and even recommended in scouting guides, all of which created the impression that quick, dramatic action could stop poison from spreading. The misconception spread because it seemed practical. Drawing venom out by mouth looked like a direct way to remove danger, while a tight band around the limb appeared to trap it in place. Both techniques fit neatly into the logic of first aid before modern medical understanding. Early explorers and folk traditions repeated these methods, and they became deeply rooted in popular culture. Medical research shows these practices are ineffective and sometimes harmful. Attempting to suck out venom doesn't remove a significant amount. Instead, it can damage tissue and introduce infection. Tourniquets, meanwhile, cut off blood flow entirely, which can cause severe tissue injury or even loss of a limb. Venom spreads not only through blood, but also through lymphatic channels, meaning these methods do little to stop its movement. A real-world example came from US Army studies during the mid-20th century, which tested suction devices designed for snake bites. Results showed that less than 2% of venom could be removed this way, far too little to make a difference. Modern emergency medicine emphasizes immobilization instead, keeping the victim calm and the bitten limb still, so venom spreads more slowly until antivenom can be administered in a hospital. The correct understanding is that traditional methods like sucking or tourniquets don't save lives. What actually matters is calling for medical help immediately, minimizing movement, and allowing trained professionals to provide treatment. Earwax is just dirt. The wax inside your ear is just dirt that should be cleaned out with cotton swabs. That claim sounds tidy, but it misunderstands what earwax is and what it does. Earwax is made by tiny glands in the ear canal. It traps dust and pollen, keeps the skin from drying and cracking, and slows the growth of germs. It even moves outward on its own as you talk and chew, carrying debris with it. In most ears, this slow conveyor belt is all the cleaning that is needed. So why the cotton swab habit? A swab gives a quick feeling of cleanliness, and ads once showed people using them in ears. The result is a lasting routine that looks helpful, but often causes serious problems. A swab tends to push wax deeper, packing it against the eardrum. That can lead to a plugged feeling, ringing, muffled hearing, itching, or infection. In the worst cases, a hard poke can scratch the canal or perforate the eardrum. That is why even the box says not to insert swabs into the ear canal. Basic care is simple. Wipe the outer ear with a damp cloth. If wax builds up, softening drops such as saline or a few drops of mineral oil can help it work its way out. For stubborn blockage, a clinician can remove it safely with proper tools under direct vision. Skip ear candles and sharp objects. Both increase the risk of burns, injury, and infection without clearing wax effectively. There are times to seek care right away. Sudden hearing loss, pain, drainage with a bad smell, or a child with suspected blockage. These are not home projects. The practical takeaway is specific. Earwax is a protective, self-cleaning material. Clean only the outer ear, avoid cotton swabs, and ask a professional to handle true blockages. Your heart is on the left side of your chest. It's often said that your heart is located on the left side of your chest. The belief feels convincing because when people place a hand over their chest to feel their heartbeat, the strongest pulse can be detected on the left. Movies, pledges, and cultural habits reinforce the gesture, anchoring the idea that the heart itself sits entirely on that side. The misconception spread through repetition in daily life. School ceremonies instructed children to place their right hand over the left chest. Sports teams echoed the tradition, and popular media dramatized the clutching the left side image to symbolize a heart attack. Over time, the symbolism overshadowed the anatomy. Medical science shows the reality is more balanced. The heart sits almost in the center of the chest, tilted slightly to the left. Its base is anchored toward the middle, behind the sternum, while the pointed tip, called the apex, leans leftward. That leftward angle explains why the heartbeat is easiest to feel or hear on the left. But anatomically, the organ is not located exclusively there. A striking example comes from chest imaging. X-rays and CT scans reveal the heart positioned between the lungs, with about 1/3 lying to the right of center and 2/3 to the left. This central placement allows it to pump blood evenly to both sides of the body. In rare cases, a condition known as dextrocardia places the heart's apex to the right, proving that the common belief about location is more tradition than biology. The correct understanding is that your heart sits centrally with a leftward tilt, not purely on the left. What actually matters is appreciating how its position serves function, circulating blood efficiently throughout the body rather than fitting neatly into a symbolic gesture. Jumping at the last second in a falling elevator will save you. That sounds clever and quick, but it does not work. The idea spread through action scenes and survival tips that oversimplify physics. In those stories, timing the jump looks like it cancels the fall, so it became a popular bit of advice passed around as a just-in-case tactic. Here is the reality. A jump changes your speed by only a small amount. Even a strong vertical jump adds roughly 2 to 3 meters per second upward. A car that is dropping rapidly would be moving far faster than that. So the difference your legs can make is tiny. The timing would also have to be perfect within a fraction of a second, which is not possible without knowing exactly when the car will stop. Worse, jumping at the wrong moment can throw you off balance, send you into the ceiling, or position you poorly for impact. Modern elevators are designed not to free fall. Multiple steel suspension cables share the load, and each cable can usually hold the car by itself. A speed governor detects excessive descent and triggers safeties that clamp the rails. Hydraulic or spring buffers at the pit slow a hard landing. These systems make true free-fall events extraordinarily rare. If a car descends abruptly or stops between floors, the safer steps are simple. Press the alarm and call buttons. Stay inside the car. Stand with your back against a wall, bend your knees slightly, and hold a handrail if one is available. Protect your head and neck with an arm if you feel a jolt coming. Wait for trained personnel to assist. The specific takeaway is that jumping will not save you. Elevator safety systems prevent free fall, and bracing, staying put, and calling for help are the actions that reduce risk. You can't grow new brain cells after childhood. Textbooks once declared that after childhood, the brain could no longer produce new cells. The idea was presented as settled science. Neurons lost to injury, disease, or aging were gone forever. For decades, this claim was repeated by teachers, doctors, and even in public health campaigns, shaping the belief that the brain was a static organ rather than a dynamic one. The misconception spread because early research tools were limited. In the early 1900s, microscopes and staining methods could map neurons but not detect new growth. When scientists saw a stable number of cells in adult brain tissue, they concluded incorrectly that no new ones were forming. This conclusion fit neatly with the idea that childhood was the critical window for brain development, so the claim was rarely challenged. Evidence began overturning the myth in the latter half of the 20th century. In the 1960s, experiments on rodents hinted at new neurons forming in adult brains, but the findings were dismissed. It wasn't until the 1990s when researchers at the Salk Institute demonstrated neurogenesis in the hippocampus of adult mammals that the scientific community began to accept the possibility. Soon after, studies on humans confirmed the same process. A landmark 2013 study from Sweden used carbon dating techniques to show that thousands of new neurons are added to the hippocampus daily, even in adulthood. The reality is that brain plasticity, the ability to adapt and rewire, includes the generation of new cells in certain regions, especially those linked to memory and learning. Exercise, cognitive stimulation, and healthy habits can all encourage this process. The fact to remember is that the brain doesn't simply decline after childhood. In practice, it continues to renew itself, offering opportunities for growth and repair throughout life. CPR restarts the heart. It is often thought that cardiopulmonary resuscitation, or CPR, restarts the heart. This belief has been reinforced by television shows and movies, where a few chest compressions and breaths bring someone back to life. In reality, CPR does not restart a stopped heart. The misconception spread because dramatized versions of medical emergencies simplify the process. On screen, CPR looks like a life-saving cure that immediately reverses cardiac arrest. In truth, CPR's role is different. When the heart stops beating effectively, blood no longer carries oxygen to the brain and vital organs. Permanent damage can occur within minutes. CPR is designed to manually pump blood through the body until more advanced treatment arrives. Chest compressions push down on the sternum, squeezing the heart between the breastbone and the spine. This action circulates a small but critical amount of blood. Rescue breaths, when provided, add oxygen. The goal is not to restart the heart, but to keep oxygenated blood flowing. Without it, survival rates drop sharply. The actual method that can restart a heart in many cases is defibrillation, which uses an electric shock to correct abnormal rhythms. That is why automated external defibrillators, or AEDs, are installed in airports, schools, and public buildings. They are designed for bystanders to use, with voice instructions that guide each step. CPR keeps a patient alive long enough for a defibrillator or trained medical team to have a chance at restoring normal heart function. The accurate understanding is that CPR preserves life by maintaining blood and oxygen flow, but restarting the heart typically requires defibrillation or medical intervention. 3. During a seizure, put something in the person's mouth. During a seizure, you should put something in the person's mouth. This sounds protective, but it is wrong and unsafe. The idea grew from old first aid habits and scenes where a bystander wedges a spoon or a wallet between the teeth to save the tongue. People worry about biting or swallowing the tongue and want to act quickly, so the mouth becomes the focus. Over time, that image spread through families and movies until it felt like standard care. In reality, putting anything in the mouth creates new dangers. A hard object can chip teeth or injure the jaw. A soft object can slip backward and block the airway. Fingers used to hold the mouth open can be badly bitten. Most importantly, a person cannot swallow their tongue. During a seizure, the jaw moves unpredictably, so forcing objects between the teeth adds harm without solving a real problem. The safer response is simple and practical. Stay calm. Guide the person away from traffic, furniture edges, and hard corners. Cushion the head with a folded jacket or towel. Loosen tight clothing around the neck. Do not restrain their movements and do not offer food, drink, or pills. Time the event from the start. When the shaking stops, roll the person onto their side so saliva can drain and breathing stays open. Stay with them as awareness returns. Call emergency services if the seizure lasts longer than 5 minutes, happens again without full recovery, causes injury, occurs in water, involves pregnancy, or if it is a first known seizure. The reliable rule is specific to this situation. Never place objects or fingers in the mouth during a seizure. Protect the head, clear nearby hazards, roll to the side afterward, and get prompt medical help when the seizure is prolonged or unusual. Brain size determines intelligence. That claim sounds tidy, but it is wrong. The idea stuck because size is easy to see. In the 1800s, researchers weighed brains and measured skulls, hoping to sort minds by volume. Bigger seemed better, and that simple rule filtered into textbooks and everyday talk. It felt like common sense. More space must mean more thinking. Modern evidence shows a different pattern. Elephants and whales have brains far larger than ours, yet their abilities do not scale with volume alone. What matters is how a brain is built and how it uses its space and energy. Relative size plays a role, but organization and efficiency matter more than bulk. Consider familiar examples. Crows and parrots have small heads, yet they solve puzzles, use tools, plan ahead, and learn from each other. Their brains pack many neurons into a compact space, with circuits tuned for flexible behavior. By contrast, some large grazing animals have much bigger brains than these birds, but show far less complex problem solving. Even across humans, head size does not predict who will learn a new skill faster or reason more clearly. Details inside the tissue help explain this. Dense networks, rich connections between regions, and a large share of tissue devoted to planning, language, and social understanding support the kind of intelligence people notice in daily life. Learning strengthens these networks, and experience can refine them through practice, sleep, and attention. That is why education, health, and environment shape outcomes so strongly. The practical takeaway is specific. Intelligence is not set by how many cubic centimeters of brain you carry. It depends on how the brain is organized, how many neurons it can recruit, and how effectively those networks work together, which is why humans excel without having the biggest brains in the animal kingdom. Incognito, or private mode, makes you anonymous online. The belief grew from the way browsers present the feature. The name suggests secrecy, the new window looks different, and the small mask icon implies privacy. Tutorials often highlight that history and cookies are not saved, which can be misread as full anonymity. Over time, those signals blended into a simple message that private mode hides you on the internet. Here is what it actually does. Incognito, or private windows, stop your browser from storing local records. Pages you visit are not added to history. Cookies created in that window are erased when you close it. Searches and form entries are not saved for later. On a shared computer, this prevents the next person from seeing what you looked at. None of this hides you from the outside world. Websites still see your IP address and can log your visits. Your internet provider and network owner can view traffic records. Many sites identify you the moment you sign in. Advertisers can link sessions with techniques like browser fingerprinting. Files you download and bookmarks you create remain after the window closes. Extensions can still run unless you disable them in private mode. If malware is present, private browsing does not remove it. Everyday examples make the limits clear. Using private mode on a work laptop does not hide activity from the company network. Opening a private window on cafe Wi-Fi does not keep the cafe or your provider from knowing which sites you reached. Signing into a social account ties your activity to that account, whether the tab is private or not. The accurate takeaway is simple and specific. Private mode clears local traces on your device, but it does not make you anonymous to websites, your internet provider, or the network you are using. Microwaving food destroys its nutrients. When microwave ovens first appeared in homes, a suspicion followed them that their unusual method of heating stripped food of its nutrients. The idea stuck quickly, and generations repeated the warning as if every push of the start button was secretly making food less healthy. This belief spread because the technology felt unfamiliar. Unlike stovetops or ovens, microwaves worked invisibly, using waves instead of flames, which fueled public mistrust. Marketing for traditional cooking methods leaned on the perception that slow and natural meant healthier, while the softened texture of microwaved vegetables reinforced the illusion that nutrients had been lost. Over time, the rumor hardened into a household rule. Scientific evidence shows that microwaving is far from destructive. Nutrient loss during cooking depends mostly on heat exposure, cooking time, and water contact, not the appliance itself. Because microwaves cook food quickly and with little or no water, they often preserve nutrients better than boiling or simmering. Vitamin C and B vitamins, which are especially sensitive to water and long cooking times, tend to survive better in microwaved vegetables. A striking example comes from a study in food chemistry that compared different cooking methods. Broccoli and spinach, prepared in a microwave, retained more antioxidants than when they were boiled. The difference wasn't in the type of heat, but in how little water and time were used. In this sense, microwaving can be one of the most protective cooking methods, not the most harmful. The fact to remember is that microwaves don't destroy nutrients, they often safeguard them. In practice, what actually matters is minimizing water and overcooking, regardless of whether the heat comes from a pan, an oven, or a microwave. You must take 10,000 steps a day for health. You must take 10,000 steps a day for good health. That number sounds precise and scientific, but it did not come from medical research. The origin traces back to Japan in the 1960s, when a pedometer was marketed under the name Manpo-kei, which translates to 10,000 step meter. The figure was chosen because it was easy to remember and had a positive, motivating feel. Over time, the number stuck in fitness culture, repeated in advertisements, health magazines, and eventually built into fitness trackers and smartphone apps. Its constant presence gave it authority, and soon it was treated as a universal requirement. Studies show that walking is unquestionably beneficial, but the benefits do not hinge on a single cut-off point like 10,000. Research following large groups of adults has found that health outcomes improve with far fewer steps. For example, walking around 4,000 to 6,000 steps per day is linked to lower risks of early death and chronic illness. Older adults in particular see measurable improvements at these levels, showing that health gains start well below the 10,000 mark. What really matters is consistency and building activity into daily routines. Choosing stairs instead of elevators, walking short distances instead of driving, or taking regular breaks from sitting all contribute. For those who enjoy targets, setting gradual goals based on current activity is often more sustainable than aiming for an arbitrary universal figure. The clear conclusion is that 10,000 steps was a marketing number, not a medical standard. Regular movement in any amount above a sedentary baseline supports health, and meaningful benefits begin well before the 10,000 step mark. Fruit juice is healthy. That sounds reasonable because it comes from fruit, but the claim does not hold up when you look at how juice is made and how the body handles it. The idea grew from labels that highlight vitamins, school programs that swapped soda for juice, and ads that pair a bright glass with breakfast. Juice feels natural and convenient, so it picks up a health halo even when the nutrition profile is closer to a sweet drink than a whole food. Here is the key difference. Whole fruit contains fiber, water, and intact cell structure. Chewing slows you down, fiber fills you up, and sugars enter the bloodstream more gradually. Juicing strips out most of the fiber and concentrates the sugars into a small volume that is easy to drink quickly. An everyday example makes this clear. A small glass of apple juice can contain the sugar of several apples, but it does not deliver the same fullness you would feel after eating those apples. Method does not change the core issue. Cold-pressed juice, fresh squeezed juice, and shelf-stable juice all contain rapidly absorbed sugars with little fiber. Smoothies can be better because they keep the whole fruit, but large portions mixed with juice or sweetened yogurt can still push sugar intake high. For people who enjoy juice, smaller servings or diluting with water can help, and pairing juice with a meal that includes protein or fat may blunt rapid sugar spikes. Vitamins still count, but they are not unique to juice. You can get vitamin C, folate, and potassium from whole fruit and vegetables without the concentrated sugar load. The practical takeaway is simple and specific. Fruit juice is best treated as an occasional sweet beverage, while whole fruit provides the fiber, fullness, and steadier nutrition that people expect when they choose fruit for health. Wearing glasses makes your eyesight weaker over time. It's a common belief that wearing glasses makes your eyesight weaker over time. The story goes that once you start using corrective lenses, your eyes get lazy, relying on the glasses instead of working to stay strong. Parents have warned children about becoming dependent on them, and many adults delay getting glasses out of fear they'll speed up vision loss. This misconception spread because of how vision naturally changes. People who begin wearing glasses often notice that, after a while, their eyes seem blurrier without them. It feels like the glasses caused the decline, when in fact, the lenses only revealed how poor their vision already was. Age-related changes, like the progression of nearsightedness in teenagers or presbyopia in middle age, would have happened with or without glasses. The timing made glasses the scapegoat. Scientific evidence shows why this belief doesn't hold. Glasses don't alter the shape of the eye or its biology. They simply bend light so it focuses correctly on the retina. The eye continues its natural course of development or aging whether glasses are worn or not. A 2017 study in investigative ophthalmology and visual science confirmed that wearing corrective lenses does not accelerate the progression of myopia. The changes people notice are due to the underlying condition, not the glasses. A useful contrast comes from people who never wear glasses despite poor vision. Their eyesight still worsens over time, proving that avoiding lenses does not stop the progression. The only difference is that they live with unnecessary blur. The correct understanding is that glasses don't make eyesight weaker, they make life clearer. What actually matters is regular eye exams and proper correction, ensuring healthy vision management rather than resisting lenses out of fear. Blue light from screens damages your eyes. Blue light from screens damages your eyes. That claim is repeated often, but it is not supported by scientific evidence. The concern took root as screens became part of everyday life. People noticed eye strain after long hours at computers or phones and looked for a clear cause. Blue light sounded like a likely culprit because it is a visible, high-energy part of the spectrum, and marketing for blue light blocking glasses reinforced the idea. Over time, the message shifted from strain to damage, even though research never confirmed that step. Here is what actually happens. Blue light does reach your eyes from screens, but the intensity is very low compared to natural daylight. A short walk outside exposes you to far more blue light than hours spent at a computer. Studies show that screen exposure at normal use levels does not cause permanent eye damage. What most people experience instead is digital eye strain. This comes from long periods of focusing at a short distance, less frequent blinking, and glare from bright displays. The discomfort, dryness, tired eyes, or headaches can feel like damage, but it is temporary and relieved with breaks, blinking, and adjusting screen distance. Blue light does have an effect on sleep by influencing circadian rhythms. Exposure late at night can make it harder to fall asleep, which is why reducing screen brightness or using warmer tones before bed can help. But this is a matter of sleep timing, not eye health. The practical takeaway is clear. Blue light from screens does not harm your eyes, but long unbroken use can cause eye strain and disrupt sleep, which is best managed by taking breaks, adjusting lighting, and limiting screen time before bedtime. Let wounds air out so they heal faster. It was long believed that letting a wound air out would help it heal faster. The reasoning was simple. Scabs were seen as protective layers, and fresh air was thought to dry and cleanse the injury. Parents and grandparents passed down this advice, making it a household standard for generations. The idea gained traction partly through tradition and partly through early medical practice. Before the widespread understanding of germs, cleanliness was associated with dryness. A wound that looked dry and sealed under a scab was assumed to be healing properly. This belief was so persistent that even as medical knowledge advanced, the habit of leaving cuts uncovered remained common. Modern research shows why this approach is outdated. Studies in wound care have demonstrated that moist environments actually promote faster and more effective healing. When a wound is kept covered and slightly moist, new skin cells can migrate more easily across the surface. By contrast, a wound left to dry out under a scab slows this process, leading to longer healing times and more noticeable scarring. A clear example comes from clinical comparisons between uncovered wounds and those treated with sterile dressings. Patients with covered wounds consistently experienced quicker recovery and reduced infection rates. Hospitals now use moist wound healing methods as the standard of care, confirming that the older air-out method doesn't match the evidence. This doesn't mean wounds should be sealed without care. Cleaning them properly and changing dressings as needed is critical. But keeping a wound exposed to the open air is no longer considered best practice. The correct understanding is that covered wounds heal more efficiently and with fewer complications. What actually matters is proper cleaning, protection, and maintaining a moist environment, not leaving injuries uncovered. Best before dates tell you when food becomes unsafe. Supermarket labels have convinced many people that the date printed on packaging is the exact point when food becomes unsafe. The wording looks official, and over time the best before stamp has been treated almost like a built-in health warning, rather than what it truly represents. This belief caught on through a mix of marketing and habit. When manufacturers first introduced best before dates, the goal was to highlight when a product would taste freshest or look most appealing. But the precision of a stamped date gave the impression of scientific accuracy. Paired with public messages about food safety, shoppers began treating these dates as an expiration of safety rather than of quality. Families repeated the lesson at home until it became second nature to toss food once the calendar moved past the printed number. The science tells a different story. Best before dates mark the period when producers guarantee peak quality, not the moment food spoils. Pasta, rice, and canned goods often remain perfectly safe months or even years beyond their listed date if stored correctly. Even items like yogurt or cheese can be safe after the label date, provided they've been kept at the right temperature and show no signs of spoilage. A 2013 Harvard study found that widespread confusion between best before and use by dates was a leading driver of unnecessary food waste, discarding billions of pounds of still edible food every year. The reliable step is to treat best before dates as guidelines for flavour and texture, not safety. Checking how food looks, smells and tastes, combined with proper storage, is a far better measure. The fact to remember is that these labels are about quality assurance, not a countdown to danger. Mobile phones can ignite gasoline at the pump. This belief sounds serious, but it is not supported by evidence. The idea spread in the late 1990s and early 2000s, when chain emails and safety notices warned that using a phone near a gas pump could spark a fire. Gas stations began putting up no cell phone signs, and the warning became part of everyday caution. The mix of flammable fuel vapors and electronics seemed like enough to make the claim believable. In reality, mobile phones do not produce the type of spark needed to ignite gasoline. Their electrical components are insulated, and they are designed not to release open sparks under normal use. Studies by safety organizations and regulatory agencies have investigated reported incidents. In nearly all cases, the actual cause of ignition was static electricity, not mobile phones. Static can build when a person slides out of a car, then discharge when touching the metal nozzle. That spark, not a phone, is capable of igniting vapors. Everyday comparisons help underline the point. People safely use phones around household gas appliances, propane grills, and in kitchens with natural gas. The controlled electronics inside a phone are not a realistic ignition source. The far greater risks at gas stations come from smoking, open flames, and static discharges. Gas stations often keep the no phone signs, but mainly to discourage distractions. Using a phone can make drivers less attentive while fueling, which can lead to spills or other unsafe behaviour. The accurate takeaway is specific. Mobile phones are not a fire hazard at gas pumps. The real concerns are static sparks, open flames, and distractions, which is why grounding yourself and staying focused while fueling are the effective safety steps. Lying flat on the ground is safest in a lightning storm. That guidance has been passed along for years, but it is not correct. The belief spread because it seems logical. People think lowering themselves to the ground makes them less of a target, and older safety pamphlets sometimes suggested this approach. The image of staying as low as possible became a rule of thumb, even though later research showed it increases danger in a different way. Here is why it does not work. When lightning strikes, the current spreads across the ground in all directions. This effect is called ground current, and it can travel dozens of feet from the strike point. The wider your body is in contact with the ground, the more of that current can pass through you. Lying flat maximizes the surface area exposed, which increases the chance of serious injury. The better option is to minimize both your height and your contact with the ground at the same time. Safety experts recommend the lightning crouch. This means squatting low with your feet together, your head tucked, and your hands over your ears. You stay compact to reduce height, but you also keep as little of your body as possible touching the ground. It is not comfortable, but it reduces risk until you can reach proper shelter. Real protection comes from being indoors. A substantial building with plumbing and wiring, or a fully enclosed metal vehicle, are the safest places to wait out a storm. Standing under trees, open shelters, or lying on open ground are all poor choices compared to reaching cover. The specific takeaway is that lying flat on the ground is not safe in a lightning storm. Reducing height while limiting ground contact and finding real shelter are the steps that lower risk most effectively. Being cold makes you sick. It's often said that being out in the cold will make you sick. The image of shivering children catching colds after playing outside without a jacket has been repeated in families for generations, turning chilly weather into the villain behind winter illnesses. But while cold air may feel uncomfortable, it is not the cause of viral infections. The misconceptions spread through tradition and timing. Colds and the flu surge in the winter months, so people naturally linked the season's chill to the rise in illness. Parents warned against wet hair, drafty rooms, or bare feet on cold floors, convinced that exposure to cold itself was to blame. Over time, these warnings hardened into rules of health, even though the real culprits were infectious agents. Scientific evidence has long clarified the difference. Colds and influenza are caused by viruses, not by temperature. Rhinoviruses, for example, spread more easily when people gather indoors in close contact during colder months. Lower humidity in winter also helps viruses survive longer in the air and on surfaces. Cold weather influences conditions for transmission, but it does not generate illness on its own. A striking study published in the New England Journal of Medicine exposed volunteers to cold air and damp conditions. Those who had not been exposed to a virus beforehand remained healthy, showing that chill alone did not trigger sickness. By contrast, participants exposed to a virus became ill regardless of whether they were warm or cold. This contrast explains why outbreaks cluster in colder seasons. Not because the air infects us, but because the environment helps viruses spread more efficiently. The correct understanding is that being cold doesn't make you sick. What actually matters is viral exposure and immune response, not the temperature outside. All calories are equal no matter the source. Diet culture often insists that a calorie is just a calorie, no matter where it comes from. The phrase sounds definitive, and it has been repeated in food advertising, weight loss guides, and even nutrition classes. The appeal is its simplicity. Measure your calories, keep them balanced, and the source doesn't matter. But human biology is more complex than this equation suggests. The misconception spread through early nutrition science. At the turn of the 20th century, researchers introduced calorie charts to measure energy in food, a helpful tool for understanding diets at scale. Yet the system treated all calories the same, ignoring how digestion, hormones, and metabolism vary depending on the type of food. Over time, this reductionist view seeped into diet plans and food labeling, leading people to equate a sugary drink with a handful of almonds if both carried the same calorie count. Scientific evidence shows clear differences in how the body handles calories from different sources. Protein, for example, has a higher thermic effect, meaning the body burns more energy digesting it. Foods rich in fiber slow down digestion and promote fullness, while refined sugars are absorbed quickly, causing blood sugar spikes and crashes that influence hunger and energy. A striking study published in Food and Nutrition Research compared whole foods to processed ones with identical calorie counts. Participants eating whole foods burn significantly more energy during digestion, highlighting how calorie quality changes outcomes even when the numbers match. Side-by-side comparisons illustrate the point. 100 calories of candy may leave you hungrier within an hour, while 100 calories of nuts or vegetables provides lasting satiety and better nutrient balance. The fact to remember is that not all calories are equal. In practice, the quality of food matters just as much as the quantity. Muscle turns into fat when you stop working out. It's often said that when you stop working out, your muscle turns into fat. The claim is so common that many people picture their hard-earned muscle fibers slowly transforming into fat tissue, as if one could simply morph into the other. This belief is repeated in gyms, fitness magazines, and casual conversations, but it's based on a misunderstanding of how the body works. The misconception spread partly because of what people observe. Someone who stops exercising may lose muscle definition and gain weight at the same time. To the untrained eye, it looks like muscle is changed into fat. Fitness culture sometimes leaned on this idea as a scare tactic, encouraging people to never stop training or risk undoing all their progress. Biology shows a different reality. Muscle and fat are two distinct types of tissue. Muscle fibers contract and burn energy, while fat cells store it. One cannot transform into the other. What actually happens is that without regular training, muscles shrink through a process called atrophy. At the same time, if calorie intake remains high while energy use drops, fat cells expand. The two changes occur side by side, creating the illusion of one tissue turning into another. A clear demonstration comes from studies on athletes who retire. Research published in the Journal of Applied Physiology shows that muscle mass declines rapidly without training, while body fat increases if diet and activity aren't adjusted. The overall body composition shifts, but each tissue remains separate in its function and identity. The correct understanding is that muscle doesn't become fat. What actually matters is maintaining balance, continuing some form of activity and adjusting nutrition, so that when workouts decrease, muscle loss and fat gain don't happen at the same time. Spot reducing fat is a common promise in workouts and ads, but it is wrong. The idea lingers because it sounds efficient. Magazines and gadgets pitch belly blasters, thigh trimmers, and arm burners. You feel a burn in that area, so it seems like nearby fat will melt first. That sensation is simply your muscle working hard, not nearby fat disappearing. Here is how the body uses stored energy. When you exercise, muscles ask for fuel. Your body releases fatty acids from fat stores into the bloodstream, then active muscles burn that fuel. The muscle you are training does not get to choose which fat cell supplies it. Genetics, hormones, blood flow, and overall energy balance decide the pattern. Everyday examples make this clear. Hundreds of crunches can build stronger abdominal muscles, but the waistline will not shrink unless overall fat goes down. Push-ups define chest and arms, but upper arm soft areas change only as overall fat drops. Runners who train the legs most still lose fat from many regions, not only the thighs. What works is simple and steady. Create a modest calorie deficit through food choices you can sustain. Use full body activity such as walking, cycling, swimming, and circuits to raise overall energy use. Keep 2 or 3 days of resistance training to maintain muscle, which helps metabolism and shape as fat comes off. Sleep well and limit long stretches of sitting. Both influence appetite and recovery. Track progress with photos or a tape measure. Different areas change at different rates over the months. You can shape where you gain muscle, but you cannot pick where fat leaves first. Fat loss is a whole body process shaped by biology and habits, so train the full body, eat consistently, and let the distribution change over time. A heart attack and cardiac arrest are the same thing. That statement mixes two emergencies that look related but work very differently. The confusion comes from how these events are shown on screen. A person clutches the chest, collapses, and a single shock brings them back. Over time, that blended scene made people think the terms describe the same problem. In real life, one is mainly a blood flow problem, and the other is an electrical failure. A heart attack happens when a blood vessel that feeds the heart muscle becomes blocked. Part of the heart is starved of oxygen, and the muscle starts to die. People often stay awake and breathing. They may feel pressure in the chest, pain that spreads to the arm, jaw, or back, shortness of breath, sweating, or nausea. The heart usually keeps beating at first. The treatment is to restore blood flow quickly in a hospital. Cardiac arrest means the heart suddenly stops pumping effectively. It is an electrical problem, often a chaotic rhythm that cannot move blood. The person collapses, has no normal breathing, and no pulse. This is immediately fatal without action. The treatment starts where it happens. Call emergency services, begin CPR, and use an automated external defibrillator if one is available. These steps keep blood moving and can restart an organized rhythm until a medical team takes over. The two events can be linked. A heart attack can trigger cardiac arrest, but many arrests are caused by other issues such as inherited rhythm problems, severe blood loss, drug overdose, drowning, or electrocution. Likewise, many heart attacks never lead to arrest if treated in time. The practical takeaway is specific. A heart attack is a circulation problem that needs urgent hospital care, while cardiac arrest is a sudden stop that needs CPR and a defibrillator immediately. Coughing hard can stop a heart attack. That instruction circulates online, but it is wrong and unsafe. The idea grew from chain emails and a misunderstanding of a hospital technique. In some monitored settings, a conscious patient with a sudden abnormal heart rhythm may be told by a clinician to cough briefly while staff prepare treatment. That temporary measure was never meant for the public, and it does not treat a heart attack on its own. A heart attack happens when a blood vessel that supplies the heart becomes blocked. Coughing cannot open a blocked artery. At home or on the street, repeated forceful coughing can raise chest pressure for a moment, but it risks making a sick person lightheaded or causing injury, and it wastes time that should be used to get help. The scenes where someone coughs themselves back to safety blend two different problems. An electrical rhythm collapse needs defibrillation and CPR. A blocked artery needs urgent medical care to restore blood flow. The safer steps are straightforward. If you or someone near you has warning signs like pressure in the chest, pain that may spread to the arm, jaw, or back, shortness of breath, sweating, or nausea, call emergency services immediately. Sit down, stay as still and calm as possible, and unlock the door for responders. If you're not allergic and have no reason to avoid it, chew an aspirin while you wait. Do not drive yourself. If the person collapses and is not breathing normally, begin CPR and use an automated external defibrillator if one is available. The clear takeaway is specific to this myth. Cough CPR is not a treatment for a heart attack. Call for help, stay still, use aspirin if appropriate, and be ready for CPR and a defibrillator if the person loses consciousness. Tetanus comes from rust itself. That statement is false, even though it has been repeated for decades. The myth spread because many injuries that risk tetanus involve old, rusty nails, farm tools, or fences. People saw a link between rust and infection, so the rust was blamed directly. Parents and teachers passed down warnings about stepping on a rusty nail, and the story hardened into a rule. The actual cause of tetanus is a bacterium called Clostridium tetani. This bacterium lives in soil, dust, and animal waste. It produces spores that can survive for years on outdoor surfaces. If these spores enter the body through a deep puncture, they can germinate in the low oxygen environment of muscle tissue. Once active, the bacteria release a toxin that affects the nervous system and causes the painful muscle spasms associated with tetanus. Rust itself does not contain the bacteria. It only creates conditions that increase risk. Rusty metal is usually outdoors and exposed to dirt and manure, so spores are more likely to be present. The rough, uneven surface of rust can also cause deep, jagged wounds, which provide the low oxygen environment the bacteria need. That is why rusty objects have become a symbol of tetanus, even though the real danger is the contamination, not the rust. Everyday examples underline this. A new clean nail left in garden soil can carry spores just as easily as an old rusty one. A cut from a shovel, a splinter of wood, or even a scrape from the ground can be enough if spores enter the wound. The accurate takeaway is specific. Tetanus does not come from rust. It comes from bacterial spores in the environment, which can enter through deep or dirty wounds, making vaccination and proper wound care the key protections. Washing raw chicken makes it safer. It's a common belief that washing raw chicken makes it safer to eat. The reasoning seems straightforward. Rinsing meat under running water should remove dirt, blood, and germs before cooking. This habit became deeply rooted in kitchens worldwide, often passed down through family traditions as a sign of proper cleanliness. The persistence of this practice is tied to cultural habits and visual cues. Seeing water run off raw poultry gives the impression that something harmful is being washed away. In earlier times, when refrigeration and food safety standards were less reliable, rinsing meat was promoted as a precaution. Over the years, the ritual stuck, even as science revealed it does more harm than good. Food safety research shows why this belief is misguided. Washing raw chicken does not eliminate bacteria such as Salmonella or Campylobacter. These microorganisms cling tightly to the meat's surface and are only destroyed by cooking at high temperatures. Running water over raw chicken spreads those bacteria instead of removing them. Droplets can travel up to several feet, contaminating sinks, countertops, utensils, and other foods nearby. What feels like a safety step actually increases the risk of foodborne illness. A striking demonstration came from a US Department of Agriculture study, which tracked how bacteria spread in kitchens where chicken was rinsed. Researchers found that sinks, salads, and even refrigerator handles carried traces of harmful microbes after washing. Clear evidence that water splatter did more damage than protection. The correct understanding is that raw chicken should go straight from packaging to the pan or oven without rinsing. What actually matters is thorough cooking, which reliably kills dangerous bacteria. Washing may feel like a precaution, but the real safeguard against illness lies in heat, not water. Rainwater is pure and safe to drink straight from the sky. It's often claimed that rainwater is pure and safe to drink as it falls from the sky. The belief comes from the idea that rain is simply condensed water vapor, distilled naturally by the atmosphere, and free from the contaminants found in rivers or pipes. For centuries, people collected rain in barrels and cisterns, reinforcing the impression that it was nature's cleanest source of water. The misconception spread through tradition and convenience. In many rural areas, especially before modern plumbing, rainwater was the most accessible supply. Cultural habits framed it as wholesome and fresh, while the clear appearance of rain compared to muddy river water made the claim sound even more convincing. Scientific evidence tells a different story. As raindrops fall, They pass through layers of air that contain dust, smoke, and pollutants. Rainwater often picks up sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, and other compounds that create acid rain. Studies by environmental agencies have also found traces of heavy metals, pesticides, and microorganisms in collected rain. What looks clear to the eye can still carry bacteria or chemicals that make it unsafe for direct consumption. A vivid example came from a 2022 study published in Environmental Science and Technology, which found that rainwater around the globe frequently contained levels of forever chemicals, or PFAS, above recommended safety limits. These compounds are persistent, non-degradable, and linked to health risks, showing that even in remote regions, rainwater is not as pure as it seems. This doesn't mean rainwater can't be used, but it needs proper filtration and treatment before it's safe to drink. The fact to remember is that rain is not naturally sterile. It's a collector of whatever lingers in the atmosphere. In practice, safe drinking water comes from systems designed to filter and purify it, not from the sky alone. Lightning always strikes the tallest object. It's often said that lightning always strikes the tallest object in sight. The claim feels logical. After all, the image of a bolt hitting the top of a skyscraper or a lone tree on a hill is familiar and easy to picture. This belief became so ingrained that many people treat it as a natural law rather than a simplification. The misconception spread through repetition in safety advice and visual storytelling. Teachers, parents, and weather guides often boiled complex science down to a simple phrase to make it memorable. Movies and news footage, showing lightning dramatically striking towers or steeples, reinforce the impression that height alone decides where a bolt will land. Scientific evidence shows a more complex process. Lightning doesn't simply choose the tallest object. It follows the path of least electrical resistance between the cloud and the ground. While taller objects increase the chance of being struck, other factors such as shape, isolation, and ground conductivity all play critical roles. A shorter object can still be struck if conditions make it the easier pathway. A striking case was documented by the National Weather Service in Florida, one of the most lightning-prone regions in the world. Researchers observed bolts hitting open fields, roadways, and even bodies of water, despite taller trees or poles being nearby. This confirmed that lightning often chooses unpredictable targets, guided by electrical dynamics rather than height alone. This explains why safety experts emphasize avoiding open areas, metal fences, and bodies of water, not just tall objects. Height matters, but it isn't the only factor. The correct understanding is that lightning doesn't always strike the tallest thing around. What actually matters is seeking proper shelter during a storm, since the bolt will find whatever path offers the least resistance, tall or not. Metal on your body attracts lightning. It's often assumed that wearing metal makes you more likely to be struck by lightning. The belief is reinforced by warnings about jewelry, belt buckles, or even carrying keys in a storm. The idea that shiny objects call down a lightning bolt like a magnet has been passed along for decades, but it doesn't reflect how lightning actually works. The misconception spread because of how people associate metal with electricity. Since metal conducts current so efficiently, it was easy to leap to the conclusion that it must also attract it. Safety posters and public advice often simplified the message, "Don't wear metal in a storm," because it sounded practical and easy to remember. Unfortunately, that oversimplification left many people with the wrong impression. Scientific evidence shows that lightning is not drawn to small pieces of metal on the body. What matters most is height, isolation, and the conductivity of the surrounding environment. Lightning tends to strike the tallest object in an area, whether that's a tree, a building, or a person standing alone in an open field. Metal jewelry may conduct electricity if a strike occurs, potentially worsening burns, but it does not make the strike more likely in the first place. A striking example comes from outdoor sports studies. Golfers holding clubs on exposed courses are at risk not because the club attracts lightning, but because they are the tallest point in an open area. The same logic applies to hikers with backpacks that contain metal gear. Lightning seeks a path to the ground through height and isolation, not through the presence of small objects. The correct understanding is that metal doesn't attract lightning. What actually matters is avoiding exposed, elevated positions during storms, where the body itself becomes the likely target. A penny on train tracks can derail a train. The misconception spread through a mix of folklore and fear. Parents and teachers discouraged kids from leaving objects on tracks, and exaggerating the consequences made the warning more effective. Over time, the penny became the symbol of this cautionary tale. Popular culture reinforced it with scenes in films and cartoons, where tiny obstacles were portrayed as catastrophic. Scientific evidence shows the claim doesn't hold. Modern trains weigh hundreds of tons, and their wheels are engineered to handle immense pressure. A penny weighs just a few grams and is made of soft metal, far too weak to affect the steel wheels or rails. When a train passes over a coin, the penny is flattened into a thin disc, but the train's motion is completely unaffected. In fact, engineers note that trains regularly run over debris much larger than a coin, small rocks, branches, or even misplaced tools without derailing. A vivid contrast can be seen in derailment investigations. When trains do leave the tracks, the causes are far more serious. Broken rails, mechanical failure, or major obstructions like vehicles. Compared to these, a penny is insignificant, incapable of disrupting the system. The correct understanding is that a coin on the track can't derail a train. What actually matters is recognizing the real dangers. Tampering with railways is illegal, and trespassing near tracks puts people at genuine risk, not from a penny, but from the train itself. Alcohol helps you sleep better. It's often assumed that alcohol helps you sleep better. The idea lingers because a drink before bed can make people feel drowsy, leading to the belief that alcohol is a natural sleep aid. For generations, nightcaps were treated as a harmless ritual, reinforced by cultural portrayals of a glass of wine or whiskey, easing the transition into rest. The misconception spread because of surface-level experience. Alcohol depresses the central nervous system, producing a sedative effect that can make falling asleep seem easier. Advertisements and casual traditions leaned into this effect, painting alcohol as a soothing companion at the end of the day. What was rarely discussed was the quality of sleep that followed. Scientific research reveals the deeper truth. While alcohol can shorten the time it takes to fall asleep, it disrupts the natural sleep cycle. Studies published in Alcoholism, clinical and experimental research show that alcohol suppresses rapid eye movement, or REM sleep, the stage linked to memory, learning, and mental restoration. As the body metabolizes alcohol later in the night, sleep becomes fragmented, with more frequent awakenings and lighter sleep stages. The end result is that people often wake feeling less rested, even if they believe they slept through the night. A striking example comes from sleep clinic observations. Patients who used alcohol as a nightly aid often reported falling asleep quickly, but struggled with daytime fatigue, irritability, and poor concentration. The disruption was measurable in brainwave recordings, which revealed reduced REM cycles compared to sober sleep. The correct understanding is that alcohol doesn't improve sleep quality, it undermines it. What actually matters for restful sleep is maintaining consistent routines, reducing stimulants before bed, and allowing the brain to move naturally through its restorative stages without interference. A daily glass of red wine is good for your heart. It became a popular belief that a daily glass of red wine is good for the heart. The idea was repeated in headlines, health columns, and even on wine labels, until it sounded less like a suggestion and more like medical advice. The association grew so strong that for many people, moderate drinking felt like a healthy habit rather than an indulgence. The spread of this idea can be traced to the French paradox, a phrase coined in the 1990s. Researchers observed that France had relatively low rates of heart disease, despite a diet rich in butter, cheese, and meats. Red wine, common in French culture, was singled out as the protective factor. The story caught on worldwide, supported by marketing from wine producers eager to reframe their product as beneficial. Scientific evidence tells a more complicated story. Red wine does contain antioxidants like resveratrol, which in laboratory studies show some protective effects on blood vessels. But the amounts present in a glass of wine are very small, far less than what is used in research experiments. To get the studied benefits, someone would need to consume unrealistic quantities of wine, which would negate any potential advantage because of alcohol's risks. Large-scale health studies have since clarified that alcohol, even in moderate amounts, increases risks of conditions like high blood pressure, certain cancers, and liver disease. The apparent heart benefits observed in earlier studies often reflected other lifestyle factors, like diet, exercise, or socioeconomic status, rather than the wine itself. The correct understanding is that red wine is not a heart medicine in disguise. What actually matters for heart health is a balanced diet, regular activity, and avoiding excess alcohol, rather than relying on a daily glass as a shortcut. Rum makes your body hot. It's long been claimed that drinking rum warms the body. The belief grew strong in colder regions and among sailors, where a sip of alcohol was thought to shield against icy winds. The burning sensation in the throat and the flushed cheeks after a drink seemed to confirm the idea that rum could raise body temperature from the inside out. This misconception spread largely through cultural traditions. For centuries, alcohol was used as a comfort in harsh winters, with hot toddies and spiced rums passed down as remedies. Stories of explorers braving polar expeditions with rum rations reinforce the impression that spirits served as portable heat. Marketing campaigns later leaned into the myth, depicting alcohol as a source of warmth and vitality. Modern physiology explains why the impression is misleading. Alcohol causes blood vessels near the surface of the skin to dilate, which increases blood flow and creates a sensation of warmth. This effect makes the skin feel hot and can cause temporary redness, but it also draws heat away from the body's core. In reality, internal temperature drops more quickly, leaving a person more vulnerable to cold. That's why alcohol consumption in freezing conditions has been linked to higher risks of hypothermia, not protection from it. A striking example comes from military records during World War II. Soldiers given alcohol rations in cold environments reported feeling warmer, but studies showed their core body temperatures fell faster compared to those who stayed sober. The warmth was an illusion, not a true safeguard. The correct understanding is that rum and other spirits don't heat the body. They trick it by shifting warmth to the skin while cooling the core. What actually matters is proper clothing and shelter, not alcohol. when it comes to staying warm. The healthiest urine is crystal clear. It became a widespread belief that the healthiest urine should always be crystal clear. The idea gained strength as public health campaigns emphasized hydration, and water bottle companies encouraged constant drinking as a symbol of wellness. Over time, clear urine was equated with purity, while even a slight yellow tint was seen as a warning sign of poor health. This misconception spread because of its simplicity. Checking urine color was an easy visual shortcut, far more convenient than understanding the body's actual balance of fluids and minerals. Fitness culture amplified the message, praising clear urine as a badge of proper hydration, while medical nuance was often left out. Scientific evidence, however, paints a different picture. Urine gets its color from a pigment called urochrome, a natural byproduct of hemoglobin breakdown. A pale yellow shade is not a problem. It's actually a sign that kidneys are filtering waste normally. Consistently crystal clear urine can mean overhydration, where the body is flushing out more water than it needs, along with electrolytes like sodium and potassium. In some cases, this imbalance can cause fatigue, confusion, or even a condition called hyponatremia if fluid intake is extreme. A striking example comes from endurance sports. Marathon runners who obsessively drink water to keep urine clear sometimes dilute their blood sodium to dangerous levels. Studies published in the New England Journal of Medicine found that overhydration, not dehydration, was behind several medical emergencies in long-distance races. The correct understanding is that healthy urine is usually light yellow, not perfectly clear. What actually matters is balanced hydration, drinking enough to stay comfortable and energized, without overloading the system in pursuit of a misleading visual standard. Crystal clear urine isn't a mark of peak health, it can be a sign of excess. Dandruff comes from a dry scalp. It's a common assumption that dandruff is simply the result of a dry scalp. The logic feels straightforward. Dry skin flakes on the arms or legs, so flakes on the head must come from the same cause. This explanation spread easily, reinforced by home remedies that advised adding oil or moisturizer to the scalp. But the truth is that dandruff has little to do with dryness. The misconception spread in part because of everyday observation. People noticed white flakes against dark clothing and connected them with the same seasonal dryness that affects skin elsewhere. Advertisements for hair oils and early shampoos leaned on this belief, framing the scalp as needing more moisture rather than addressing the actual cause. Scientific evidence shows that dandruff is linked to a combination of factors: an overgrowth of a yeast-like fungus called malassezia, excess oil on the scalp, and sensitivity of the skin to that environment. Instead of dryness, it is often oiliness that fuels the condition, providing the fungus with more material to feed on. The irritation this causes leads to the shedding of skin cells in larger, more visible clumps. A striking study published in the Journal of Investigative Dermatology confirmed that individuals with dandruff often had higher oil production, not lower. This is why dandruff is more common after puberty, when oil glands become more active. It also explains why anti-dandruff shampoos target fungus and oil balance, rather than simply moisturizing the scalp. In practice, this means applying oil to the scalp, a common traditional remedy, can actually make dandruff worse. Moisture may soothe itch temporarily, but it does not address the root cause. The fact to remember is that dandruff is not a symptom of dryness, but a reaction to oil, fungus, and skin sensitivity combined. Plucking one grey hair makes more grow back. It's often repeated that plucking one grey hair will cause several more to grow back in its place. the saying is passed casually between family members, used as a warning against fussing over appearance, and has become so ingrained that people picture grey hairs multiplying instantly after a single pull. But this belief is not supported by how hair actually grows. The persistence of the myth comes partly from cultural traditions. For generations, grey hair symbolized aging, and small rituals grew up around it. Advising someone not to pluck a grey hair became a way of cautioning them to accept aging gracefully. Over time, that warning hardened into a biological claim. Scientific evidence shows that hair growth doesn't work this way. Each hair grows from a follicle, and that follicle can produce only one strand at a time. Plucking a hair may temporarily remove it, but it doesn't create new follicles or trigger others nearby to turn grey. What it can do, if repeated excessively, is damage the follicle itself, sometimes preventing a hair from growing back at all. A striking contrast can be seen when comparing hair colour changes across the scalp. Greying is caused by a decline in melanin production, which happens gradually and according to genetic factors. That process occurs regardless of whether hairs are plucked or left alone. People often notice new grey hairs after pulling one, but that's simply because the natural progression of greying continues, not because plucking triggered it. The correct understanding is that plucking a grey hair won't make more grow back. What actually matters is that greying is driven by genetics and aging, not by how you treat individual strands. Plucking changes appearance temporarily, but it doesn't control the spread of grey. 20/20 vision is perfect vision. It's often assumed that having 20/20 vision means your eyesight is perfect. The phrase is used casually in conversation, in advertisements for corrective surgery, and even in everyday compliments about sharp eyesight. Over time, the number became a shorthand for flawless vision, but in reality, it represents something much narrower. The misconception spread because of how eye tests were designed. In the early 1900s, ophthalmologist Hermann Snellen introduced the eye chart still used today. On this chart, 20/20 was defined as the ability to read a line of letters from 20 feet away that most people should also be able to read from that same distance. It became a standard benchmark, not because it signified perfection, but because it provided a consistent measure. Over the decades, people outside the medical field began treating the benchmark as the maximum. Scientific evidence shows otherwise. Visual acuity, what the 20/20 test measures, is only one part of vision. It evaluates clarity at a specific distance, but ignores other important elements, like depth perception, peripheral awareness, contrast sensitivity, and color recognition. Some people actually see better than 20/20. Scores like 20/15 or even 20/010 mean they can read smaller letters at greater distances than the normal eye. Conversely, someone can have 20/20 acuity, yet struggle with night vision or visual processing, demonstrating that the metric alone doesn't define overall visual performance. A striking comparison comes from fighter pilot selection, where candidates often exceed 20/20 because superior visual sharpness is needed. Yet even those pilots must undergo additional tests for peripheral vision and reaction time, showing how incomplete the single number is. The fact to remember is that 20/20 is simply normal clarity at a set distance, not perfect vision. In practice, eye health involves far more than one score on a chart. You can sweat out fat. It became a common belief that you can sweat out fat. The image of dripping with sweat during a workout made it easy to assume that the more you perspire, the more fat you're losing. Fitness products like sweatsuits and sauna belts promoted this idea, turning sweat into a visible marker of fat burning rather than what it actually is. The misconception spread largely through marketing. In the 1970s and 1980s, weight loss ads often showed athletes or models sweating heavily, implying that sweat itself was the proof of fat melting away. The sensation of leaving a workout drenched in sweat reinforced the message, and many people confuse temporary water loss with actual fat reduction. Science explains the difference clearly. Sweat is primarily water mixed with electrolytes, not fat. When you sweat, you are cooling your body, not expelling stored fat tissue. Any weight loss from sweating is water weight, which quickly returns once you rehydrate. Fat loss happens at the cellular level when the body breaks down triglycerides stored in fat cells. The byproducts of this process, carbon dioxide and water, are expelled mainly through breathing and normal bodily functions, not through sweat alone. A vivid example comes from sauna use. People can lose several pounds of weight in a single session, but that loss is entirely from dehydration. As soon as they drink water, the weight comes back, showing that fat stores remain unchanged. Controlled studies on exercise confirm this distinction. Fat reduction is linked to calorie expenditure over time, not the amount of perspiration during a single workout. The fact to remember is that sweat is a sign of body temperature regulation, not fat loss. In practice, this means lasting fat reduction comes from sustained activity and balanced nutrition, not from sweating more. Running ruins your knees. It once seemed obvious that running would ruin your knees. The repetitive pounding, the miles on pavement, and the image of worn-out athletes limping in later life gave the impression that every step was grinding away at the joint. Coaches and doctors once repeated this warning, and it stuck as one of the most persistent fears about exercise. The spread of this idea came partly from observation without context. People saw runners with knee injuries and assumed running must be the cause, when in fact those injuries often came from overtraining, poor technique, or unrelated conditions. Popular media added to the narrative, portraying distance running as an activity destined to break the body down. Scientific evidence, however, tells a different story. Large-scale studies comparing runners and non-runners have consistently found that recreational running does not increase the risk of developing knee osteoarthritis. In fact, research published in Arthritis Care and Research found that runners were less likely to suffer from knee pain later in life compared to people who never ran. The movement involved in running actually strengthens muscles, improves cartilage health, and helps maintain a healthy body weight, all factors that protect the knees rather than harm them. A striking contrast is seen in professional athletes. Sports that involve frequent twisting and sudden impact, like soccer or football, show much higher rates of knee damage. Running in a steady, linear motion carries far less risk by comparison. While injuries can happen, they are usually tied to training errors, not the act of running itself. The correct understanding is that running, when done sensibly, supports knee health rather than destroys it. What actually matters is moderation, proper form, and listening to your body, not avoiding the activity altogether. Fat in your diet is the source of your body fat. Old advice claimed that eating fat directly leads to storing fat in the body. The message was simple, easy to understand, and it shaped diet culture for decades, but it is not correct. The misconception gained momentum in the 1970s and 1980s during the low-fat diet boom. Early studies linked high-fat intake with heart disease, and food companies quickly capitalized. shelves filled with fat-free cookies, crackers, and snacks that looked healthier by the label. People were told to avoid butter and oils while filling their carts with low-fat processed foods, often loaded with sugar. The marketing convinced millions that fat in food automatically became fat on the waistline. Science tells a different story. Dietary fat is calorie-dense, but it does not turn directly into body fat. What matters most is overall energy balance, consuming more calories than you burn. Extra calories from any source, carbohydrates, protein, or fat, can be stored as fat. In fact, fat plays critical roles in hormone production, vitamin absorption, brain health, and cell function. Removing it entirely can create more harm than benefit. Research has shown the effects of low-fat dieting compared to balanced eating. In controlled studies, people on high-carbohydrate, low-fat regimens often gained weight because the replacement foods were heavy in refined sugars and lacked satiety. Meanwhile, diets including healthy fats from sources like nuts, olive oil, and fish improved cholesterol profiles and supported long-term weight management. In practice, this means body fat comes from calorie excess, not from eating fat itself. The reliable step is to focus on the quality and balance of foods, choosing whole, nutrient-dense options and keeping portions in line with activity, rather than eliminating an entire macronutrient based on outdated advice. Eating greasy foods or chocolate will give you acne. The misconception spread heavily in the mid-20th century, when dermatologists and parents alike warned teenagers to avoid pizza, fries, and candy bars. Early studies lacked proper controls, but their results seemed to show a connection. Meanwhile, advertisements for clear skin diets and over-the-counter creams often reinforce the message, making it sound like cutting out chocolate was the solution to breakouts. The science of acne shows a different story. Acne forms when hair follicles become clogged with excess oil and dead skin cells. Hormonal changes, especially during adolescence, increase oil production, creating an environment where bacteria can grow and inflammation occurs. Greasy food on your plate does not directly change this process. Eating a burger or a piece of chocolate doesn't suddenly send oil to your skin's surface. That said, diet can play a role, but not in the way the myth suggests. Modern research points to high glycemic foods, those that spike blood sugar quickly, as potential contributors to acne severity. Sugary drinks, white bread, and certain processed foods may influence hormone levels that regulate oil production. In contrast, studies have not found consistent evidence that chocolate itself or fried foods directly cause acne, although some individuals may notice personal triggers. A good example comes from controlled studies, where participants were given either chocolate or placebo bars without cocoa. Breakouts occurred at similar rates, showing that the chocolate itself wasn't the cause. This highlights how assumptions about food and acne often come from correlation rather than proven cause. The fact to remember is that acne is driven mainly by hormones, genetics, and skin biology. Food choices can influence it, but chocolate and greasy meals are not the direct culprits. Honey is categorically healthier than sugar. A common belief is that honey is categorically healthier than sugar. The golden color, natural origin, and long history of use in traditional remedies have all contributed to its reputation as a superior sweetener. Shelves lined with jars labeled raw, organic, or unprocessed only reinforce the idea that honey must be a better choice for health than ordinary table sugar. The roots of this misconception reach back centuries. Honey was prized in ancient cultures not just as food, but as medicine. Texts from Egypt, India, and Greece described it as a healing substance, and those traditions carried forward. In modern times, marketing built on that heritage, presenting honey as nature's alternative to refined sugar. The cultural narrative proved stronger than the nutritional facts. Scientific evidence provides a clearer picture. Both honey and table sugar are largely made up of glucose and fructose. Honey does contain trace amounts of vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants, but the levels are so small that they don't make a meaningful difference in a typical diet. For example, you would need to consume impractical amounts of honey to get a measurable boost of nutrients. Calorie for calorie, honey impacts blood sugar in a way very similar to table sugar. A 2015 review in the Journal of Nutrition compared various sweeteners and found that while honey may produce slightly lower spikes in blood glucose for some people, the overall metabolic effects were nearly the same as refined sugar. In both cases, overconsumption carries risks like tooth decay and weight gain. The reliable step is to view honey and sugar as close nutritional equals. Honey may add flavor complexity or cultural significance, but it is not a health food. Moderation rather than the choice between the two makes the real difference. Brown sugar is healthier than white sugar. At first glance, it seems logical that brown sugar must be healthier than white sugar. Its deeper color, richer flavor, and association with less processed foods made it seem like the more natural choice. For decades, this impression was reinforced by packaging and recipes that marketed brown sugar as a rustic, more wholesome alternative. The roots of this misconception lie in presentation. White sugar, refined to a pure crystalline form, came to symbolize industrial food. Brown sugar, with its moist texture and caramel-like taste, looked closer to its plant origins. Cookbooks and advertisements leaned into this contrast, encouraging the idea that brown sugar contained extra nutrients stripped away from white sugar. Chemistry tells a clearer story. Brown sugar is essentially white sugar with a thin layer of molasses added back. That molasses does introduce tiny amounts of minerals like calcium, potassium, and iron, but the quantities are so small that they don't provide measurable health benefits. For example, you would need to eat large, unrealistic amounts of brown sugar to gain even a modest share of your daily mineral needs. From a nutritional perspective, the difference between the two is negligible. Food science research confirms this. Side-by-side comparisons consistently show that both brown and white sugar deliver nearly identical amounts of calories and carbohydrates. Their impact on blood sugar levels is the same. The main differences are sensory. Brown sugar has a stronger flavor, holds more moisture, and changes the texture of baked goods. These qualities make it useful in cooking, but they don't make it healthier. The fact to remember is that brown sugar and white sugar are nutritionally alike. Choosing one over the other is a matter of taste and recipe, not a meaningful health upgrade. Sea salt is healthier and lower in sodium than table salt. A widely repeated claim is that sea salt is healthier and contains less sodium than table salt. The idea became popular in recent decades as shoppers searched for more natural foods, and food companies leaned into this trend by highlighting the word sea on labels. The implication was clear. Sea salt must be a purer, gentler alternative to the plain white crystals in every kitchen. The spread of this belief is tied closely to marketing. Sea salt is often sold in larger, coarser flakes, packaged in sleek containers, and advertised as artisanal. By contrast, table salt is inexpensive, finely ground, and associated with mass production. The visual and cultural cues gave sea salt an air of sophistication and health, even though the basic chemistry tells another story. Both table salt and sea salt are primarily sodium chloride. By weight, the sodium content is nearly identical. The confusion arises from texture. A teaspoon of coarse sea salt may hold fewer crystals than the same measure of fine table salt, which makes it look like the sodium is lower. But measured by weight, they deliver essentially the same amount of sodium to the body. Scientific comparisons confirm this. Analyses published in nutrition journals consistently show that the mineral content in sea salt is only marginally higher, with tiny amounts of magnesium, potassium, or calcium. These trace minerals are too small in quantity to provide meaningful health benefits. Meanwhile, table salt often includes iodine, an additive that prevents thyroid problems, a genuine nutritional advantage rather than a drawback. The fact to remember is that sea salt and table salt are equally high in sodium, and any health differences are negligible. Choosing between them is more about taste and texture than about nutrition. Peanuts are nuts. It became a rule of thumb in kitchens and snack aisles alike that peanuts are simply another kind of nut. They're sold in cans alongside almonds and cashews, ground into butter, and even carry the word nut in their name. With packaging and tradition reinforcing the label, it's no surprise that people assumed peanuts belonged in the same botanical family as walnuts or hazelnuts. The spread of this misconception owes much to marketing and convenience. Food companies grouped peanuts with tree nuts because they looked similar, tasted savory, and were used in the same types of recipes. Culturally, the distinction wasn't necessary for the average shopper, so the shorthand stuck. Generations of consumers grew up without realizing the classification was inaccurate. Botany tells a different story. True nuts, like chestnuts or acorns, develop within a hard shell that is part of the fruit itself. Peanuts, however, grow underground in pods, more like beans or lentils. They belong to the legume family, the same group that includes peas, chickpeas, and soybeans. This makes peanuts closer relatives of lentil soup than of pistachios. A clear contrast emerges when looking at cultivation. Almond trees blossom and bear nuts high above the soil. Peanut plants, by contrast, flower above ground, but push their fertilized ovules downward into the earth, where the pods mature beneath the surface. Farmers harvest them much like they would other legumes, uprooting the plants and drying the pods. This difference isn't just academic, it matters in medicine and agriculture. Peanut allergies are managed differently from tree nut allergies because the proteins involved are distinct, even if symptoms overlap. The correct understanding is that peanuts are legumes, not nuts, and they've been mislabeled largely through tradition and marketing convenience rather than science. Adding salt makes water boil faster. It is often repeated in kitchens that adding salt to water makes it boil faster, but the science shows the opposite. This belief likely spread through cooking traditions. Salt was such a common ingredient that it was easy to assume it had multiple functions, flavoring food and speeding up cooking. Cookbooks and casual advice passed down the claim without testing it, and over time it became a kitchen fact. In reality, salt does not make water boil faster. When salt is added, it raises the boiling point of water in a process called boiling point elevation. That means salted water has to reach a slightly higher temperature before it begins to boil. While this sounds like it might cook food more quickly, the effect is so small at typical cooking concentrations that it makes no practical difference. A teaspoon of salt in a pot of water changes the boiling point by less than a degree. Laboratory studies confirm this. Chemists measuring the effect of dissolved salt on water temperature consistently show that the increase is negligible for everyday cooking. In fact, Because the boiling point is slightly higher, salted water technically takes a little longer to reach a boil than unsalted water. What salt does change meaningfully is flavor. It seasons food while it cooks, which is why the practice persists in recipes worldwide. A striking contrast is found in industrial chemistry, where large amounts of solutes are used to manipulate boiling and freezing points. Those changes can be significant. In the kitchen, however, the myth of faster boiling survives because the scientific explanation is rarely discussed. The fact to remember is that salt changes taste, not boiling speed. In practice, the reliable step is to add salt for flavor, not because it makes water boil quicker. Bananas grow on trees. It is often said that bananas grow on trees, but botanically speaking, that isn't true. The misconception spread naturally because banana plants look very much like trees. They grow tall, produce large leaves, and hold heavy bunches of fruit high above the ground. In many cultures, people describe them as banana trees out of convenience, and the term became fixed in everyday language, recipes, and marketing. Science, however, shows a different picture. Bananas grow on giant herbs, not trees. The trunk of a banana plant is not wood at all. It's a pseudostem made up of tightly packed leaf bases. Unlike real trees, which have woody tissue and can live for decades, banana plants die back after producing fruit and regenerate from underground rhizomes. This cycle makes them more like perennial herbs than permanent trees. A striking example of this distinction comes from botany textbooks. They classify bananas in the Musaceae family alongside other large herbaceous plants. The lack of woody growth disqualifies them from being trees, no matter how tall or tree-like they appear. Farmers also treat them differently. Rather than pruning like an orchard tree, banana growers cut back the pseudostem after harvest to allow a new shoot to emerge. The persistence of the banana tree myth reflects the power of appearances and language. The plant's height and structure make the term sound natural, even though it misrepresents its biology. In some regions, even agricultural reports casually refer to banana trees, reinforcing the error. The fact to remember is that bananas grow on giant herbs with pseudostems, not on trees. In practice, this means they share more in common with plants like ginger than with fruit-bearing trees like apples or mangoes. The correct understanding is that bananas are herbaceous despite their tree-like appearance. Tomatoes are vegetable. It is commonly said that tomatoes are vegetables, but by botanical definition, they are actually fruits. The confusion grew out of cultural and culinary traditions. In the kitchen, tomatoes are used in savoury dishes, soups, sauces, and salads, so they are grouped with vegetables in everyday language. Grocery stores and recipe books reinforce this habit, and generations grew up classifying tomatoes based on taste and usage rather than science. Biology, however, offers a clearer explanation. In botany, a fruit is the part of a flowering plant that develops from the ovary and contains seeds. By this definition, tomatoes, along with cucumbers, peppers, and pumpkins, are fruits. Vegetables, in contrast, are other edible parts of plants such as roots, stems, and leaves, like carrots, celery, or lettuce. A famous real-world case study cemented the confusion. In 1893, the US Supreme Court decided Nix versus Hedden, a case about whether tomatoes should be taxed as vegetables or fruits. Botanically, the lawyers agreed tomatoes were fruits, but the court ruled they should be classified as vegetables for trade purposes, since that was how the public commonly used them. the legal decision blurred the line between scientific accuracy and everyday practice, further embedding the vegetable label in society. Modern nutritionists also emphasize that whether you call it a fruit or vegetable, the tomato is a valuable source of vitamins, fiber, and antioxidants. But the classification difference still matters when discussing science and plant biology. The persistence of the myth reflects how cultural language can outweigh scientific definitions. The fact to remember is that tomatoes are fruits in the botanical sense, though often treated as vegetables in cooking and commerce. In practice, this means context determines the label, but scientifically, the tomato belongs with fruits. The toilet seat is the dirtiest thing in a home. It is often claimed that the toilet seat is the dirtiest thing in a home, but research shows this is not the case. The misconception spread because toilets are strongly associated with waste and germs. The seat, being the part people touch, became the obvious suspect. Media headlines and marketing campaigns played into this fear, repeating the idea without looking at comparative data from the rest of the household. Scientific studies have consistently shown that toilet seats, while not sterile, are relatively clean compared to other common surfaces. The smooth, non-porous material makes it harder for bacteria to cling and multiply. More importantly, toilet seats are often cleaned more frequently due to their reputation, reducing the microbial load. A striking contrast comes from a 2011 study by NSF International, which found that household kitchen sponges and dishcloths contained far more bacteria than toilet seats, sometimes thousands of times more. Cutting boards, kitchen sinks, and even remote controls harbored higher levels of microbes, including dangerous strains like E. coli and Salmonella. In another study, cell phones and computer keyboards showed more bacterial colonies than bathroom surfaces, reflecting how often they are handled without cleaning. The persistence of the toilet seat myth reveals how perception overrides evidence. Because the toilet is linked to something unpleasant, people assume it must be the worst offender. In reality, the dirtiest places in a home are those that combine frequent contact, moisture, and neglect, like kitchen sponges or damp bathroom towels. The fact to remember is that toilet seats are not the dirtiest surfaces in the home. In practice, what actually matters is paying attention to overlooked areas like sponges, sinks, and electronics, which often pose a greater risk of spreading harmful bacteria than the bathroom fixture we instinctively distrust. Swallowed chewing gum stays in your stomach for 7 years. The claim that swallowed chewing gum stays in your stomach for 7 years has been repeated to children for decades, but it isn't supported by biology. The myth likely spread because parents and teachers used it as a scare tactic to stop kids from swallowing gum. The idea of gum lingering inside the body for years sounded memorable and persuasive. Over time, the warning became so widespread that it was accepted as fact, even though medical science has long shown otherwise. In reality, chewing gum is made of a gum base, sweeteners, and flavorings. While the gum base itself is not easily broken down by digestive enzymes, it doesn't stay in the stomach. Like other indigestible substances, such as certain seeds or rough plant fibers, it passes through the digestive tract largely unchanged and is eliminated in a matter of days. Medical studies and gastroenterologists confirm this process. A 1998 review in Pediatrics reported that cases of gum-causing digestive blockages were extremely rare. And when they did occur, it was because children swallowed large amounts in a short time, often combined with other indigestible objects. This is a far cry from the myth of a single piece of gum clinging to the stomach for years. A striking contrast is to think about what else we eat that isn't digestible: corn kernels, some vegetable skins, or small seeds. Just like gum, they move through the body and exit naturally. Gum is unusual only in its rubbery texture, not in how the body handles it. The persistence of the myth reflects a cultural preference for simple, cautionary rules. But the fact to remember is that gum doesn't stick inside you for years. In practice, swallowing it occasionally is harmless, though it's still better to throw it away. Filling a room with plants keeps air fresh indefinitely because plants always make oxygen. It is sometimes claimed that filling a room with plants will keep the air fresh indefinitely because plants always produce oxygen, but this is a misunderstanding of plant biology. The misconception grew in part from the way photosynthesis is taught. Children learn that plants take in carbon dioxide and release oxygen, which is true during the day. The leap from that simple fact to plants are perpetual oxygen machines was easy, especially as houseplants became linked with wellness trends and marketing that emphasized their air-purifying benefits. In reality, plants do not constantly produce oxygen. During daylight, photosynthesis dominates. Plants absorb carbon dioxide and, using sunlight, release oxygen. But at night, in the absence of light, photosynthesis stops. Plants then switch to respiration, consuming oxygen and releasing carbon dioxide, just like animals. The amounts are small, but it shows that oxygen output is not continuous or unlimited. Scientific studies highlight another limit. A well-known NASA experiment in 1989 tested plants for air purification in sealed chambers. While plants could remove certain pollutants in controlled laboratory conditions, the effect was minimal in real-world spaces. To match the air cleaning capacity of a modern ventilation system, you would need hundreds of plants in a single room. Oxygen levels in normal environments are maintained not by a few houseplants, but by massive global ecosystems of forests, algae, and ocean phytoplankton. A striking comparison comes from submarines and space stations, where engineers rely on complex life support systems, not potted plants, to recycle air. These examples make clear that plants alone cannot indefinitely refresh enclosed spaces. The fact to remember is that plants contribute to oxygen during the day, but also consume it, and their effect indoors is limited. In practice, the reliable step is proper ventilation, not assuming plants can replace it. Fully discharging your phone battery regularly keeps it healthy. The notion that you should fully discharge your phone battery to keep it healthy lingers from an earlier era of technology, but it no longer applies to modern devices. This misconception comes from the days of nickel-cadmium batteries, which powered electronics before lithium-ion cells became the standard. Nickel-based batteries suffered from the so-called memory effect, where partial charging cycles reduce their effective capacity. To counteract this, manufacturers advised letting them run down completely before recharging. The advice made sense then, but it was carried forward into the age of smartphones, long after the science had changed. Today's phones use lithium-ion batteries, which work very differently. Lithium-ion cells don't suffer from the memory effect and are actually stressed by deep discharges. Research from battery scientists shows that allowing a lithium-ion battery to repeatedly drop to zero shortens its overall lifespan. These batteries prefer shallow cycles. Staying between about 20% and 80% charge is far healthier than draining them completely. A striking example comes from consumer electronics testing labs, where engineers simulate years of charging. Batteries regularly discharged to empty lose capacity much faster than those recharged more frequently at higher levels. It is one reason electric vehicle manufacturers build systems that prevent drivers from using the absolute top and bottom of the battery's charge. The persistence of the myth reflects how habits can outlast the technology that created them. Advice that once applied to an old chemistry no longer benefits the new. Yet the phrase, "drain it to keep it strong," still gets passed along. The fact to remember is that lithium-ion batteries last longer when partial charges are the norm. In practice, the reliable step is to avoid running your phone to zero unless absolutely necessary, not to treat it as a routine. More megapixels always means a better camera. It is often assumed that more megapixels automatically mean a better camera, but image quality depends on far more than resolution alone. This belief spread during the early digital camera boom of the 2000s. Manufacturers used megapixel counts as their main marketing tool, convincing consumers that higher numbers equaled professional quality. The simplicity of comparing one specification made it an easy selling point, even though it told only part of the story. In reality, megapixels measure the number of tiny light sensors on a camera's imaging chip. While more pixels allow for larger prints and finer detail, the size of those pixels and the quality of the lens are just as important. A 12-megapixel camera with a large sensor and good optics can outperform a 48-megapixel camera crammed onto a tiny sensor because larger pixels capture more light with less noise. A striking case comes from smartphone photography. Many flagship phones advertise 100-megapixel modes, but when tested against cameras with lower megapixel counts yet superior sensors, the results often favor the latter. Professional DSLR and mirrorless cameras sometimes have only 20 or 24 megapixels, yet their image quality surpasses phones with 5 times the resolution because of sensor size, lens clarity, and image processing. Research in imaging science confirms that low light performance, dynamic range, and color accuracy rely heavily on pixel size and sensor technology. Simply adding megapixels without addressing those factors can actually worsen performance, especially in dim conditions. The persistence of the megapixel myth reflects how consumers prefer a single, easy metric to judge quality. But photography is more complex. The fact to remember is that megapixels matter only up to a point. In practice, the reliable step is to look at sensor size, lens quality, and overall design, not just the number on the box. Using high-octane fuel makes any car faster and more efficient. It's a common claim that filling your tank with high-octane fuel will make any car faster and more efficient. But that's not how gasoline performance works. This misconception spread in part because of advertising. Oil companies promoted premium fuel as a superior product, and the word premium implied better performance for everyone. Drivers assumed higher octane equaled more power, even though octane ratings measure something different. Scientifically, octane doesn't add energy to fuel. It measures resistance to engine knock, a problem that occurs when fuel ignites prematurely under high compression. Engines designed with high compression ratios, turbochargers, or advanced timing need higher octane fuel to avoid knocking and to operate at peak efficiency. But for standard engines, using high-octane gasoline offers no performance benefit. The car won't go faster, run smoother, or get better mileage simply because the number at the pump is higher. A striking real-world comparison comes from the US Federal Trade Commission, which has repeatedly stated that using premium fuel in an engine that doesn't require it is a waste of money. Tests show no measurable improvement in horsepower, acceleration, or fuel economy in vehicles designed for regular gasoline. In contrast, cars engineered for high-octane fuel, such as certain sports models or luxury sedans, do perform worse if forced to run on regular. The persistence of the myth comes from a mix of marketing language and the human tendency to equate more expensive with better. Yet the science of combustion makes clear that higher octane is about compatibility, not universal improvement. The fact to remember is that premium fuel benefits only engines designed for it. In practice, the reliable step is to follow your vehicle manufacturer's recommendation, not assume that higher octane means higher performance. GPS satellites track your phone from space. It's often said that GPS satellites in space track your phone, but that's not how the system works. This misconception spread because the word tracking feels natural. Apps, maps, and even commercials talk about being tracked by GPS, so people imagine satellites watching or following their phones from orbit. The simplicity of that explanation made it stick, even though the actual process is the reverse. In reality, GPS satellites do not track anything. They constantly broadcast signals containing the time and their orbital position. Your phone receives these signals from multiple satellites at once, usually at least 4, and calculates how long each signal took to arrive. By measuring those differences, the device uses trilateration to determine its location on Earth. The calculation happens entirely on the phone, not in space. A striking example is that GPS works even if your phone is in airplane mode, as long as the receiver is active. That's because the phone is only listening to signals, not transmitting anything back to the satellites. The satellites never know your position, they simply provide the data your device uses to figure it out. When companies or governments do track a phone, they rely on other systems, cell towers, Wi-Fi networks, or internet connections, not on satellites following you. GPS alone doesn't send any information outward. The persistence of the myth reflects how technology is explained in shorthand. Saying the satellites track you is easier than unpacking the mathematics of signal timing, but it misrepresents what's happening. The fact to remember is that GPS satellites broadcast and your phone calculates. In practice, this means location services depend on your device interpreting signals, not on satellites watching from above. The correct understanding is that the tracking happens locally, not in orbit. Shaking a Polaroid picture will help it develop. The belief that shaking a Polaroid picture makes it develop faster has been repeated for decades, but the gesture is unnecessary and in some cases even harmful. The misconception spread through habit and culture. In the 1970s and 80s, instant photography was a novelty, and people grew impatient waiting for the image to appear. Shaking the print felt like doing something to speed the process, much like fanning wet ink or blowing on fresh paint. Music videos, movies, and even advertisements reinforce the motion, turning it into a cultural ritual more than a technical requirement. Scientifically, however, Polaroid photos don't rely on shaking. Instant film contains chemicals sealed in pods at the edge of the print. When the picture is ejected from the camera, rollers spread those chemicals evenly across the image, triggering the development process. This happens internally, regardless of movement. Shaking doesn't accelerate the reaction, it can actually disturb it. If the film isn't fully set, rapid motion may cause streaking, bubbling, or uneven color distribution. A vivid example comes from Polaroid's own documentation. The company has repeatedly explained that shaking is unnecessary, warning that it can damage the image quality. Later generations of instant film were engineered to be even more stable, making the old ritual entirely obsolete. The persistence of the myth reflects how rituals can outlive their practical purpose. People still shake Polaroids out of nostalgia, or because they've seen it done, not because it's effective. The fact to remember is that Polaroid pictures develop on their own, without help. In practice, the reliable step is to let the image rest on a flat surface or shield it from bright light, not to wave it through the air. 1 dog year equals 7 human years. The saying that 1 dog year equals 7 human years has been passed around for decades, but it doesn't hold up against biology. This simple formula likely became popular because it was easy to remember. If humans lived about 70 years on average and dogs lived about 10, multiplying by 7 seemed like a neat shortcut. Families, veterinarians, and even marketing campaigns use the rule to explain canine aging, and over time, it became accepted as fact. But science shows dog aging is much more complex. Dogs grow rapidly in their first year of life, reaching physical maturity far faster than humans. By the end of year 1, most dogs are equivalent to a human teenager. By year 2, they often compare to someone in their mid-20s. After that, the pace slows significantly, and the trajectory depends heavily on breed and size. Studies from veterinary researchers have revealed that small breeds like Chihuahuas and Dachshunds may live well into their late teens, while giant breeds like Great Danes often live fewer than 10 years. This means no single formula, whether 7 years or otherwise, can fit all dogs. In 2019, a genetic study from the University of California, San Diego, proposed a more accurate logarithmic scale, showing dogs age quickly at first, and then level off compared to humans. A striking real-world contrast is that a 2-year-old Labrador may still be full of puppy energy, but in human terms it's already comparable to someone in their late 20s, not 14 as the 7-year rule would suggest. The persistence of the myth reflects our desire for simple comparisons. The fact to remember is that dogs age unevenly, not at a flat 7-to-1 ratio. In practice, the reliable step is to account for breed, size, and life stage when thinking about a dog's age. Dogs only see in black and white. Dogs are often described as seeing the world only in shades of black and white, but that picture of their vision is simply wrong. This idea became popular decades ago when early studies of animal eyesight were limited and crude. Without the technology to measure color sensitivity and detail, researchers assumed dogs lacked the necessary photoreceptor cells, and the belief stuck. It spread further through books, cartoons, and pet magazines, which simplified the science into a memorable but misleading claim. Modern evidence shows something very different. Dogs' eyes contain 2 types of cone cells, the light-sensitive structures responsible for detecting color. Humans have 3 types, which allow us to perceive the full rainbow of red, green, and blue. Dogs, however, are missing the red detecting cones. As a result, they see a narrower palette, most similar to a person with red-green color blindness. Blues and yellows stand out sharply to them, while reds and greens appear muted or grayish. A 1989 behavioral study at the University of California used training tests with colored lights to prove this point. Dogs reliably distinguished between blue and yellow panels, even when brightness was adjusted, showing they weren't just responding to light intensity. Similar research since then has confirmed their color vision is real, though limited. The misconception lingers because black and white imagery is easier to imagine and explain than partial color blindness. It also fits cultural stereotypes of dogs as simple creatures compared to humans. But the truth is more nuanced. Their eyesight is specialized for low light conditions and motion detection, which makes sense for animals originally bred to hunt. The fact to remember is that dogs do see color, just not the full spectrum we do. Their world is dimmer and less varied, but far from black and white. Mice like cheese. Mice are often portrayed as having an irresistible craving for cheese, but that image doesn't hold up outside of cartoons and storybooks. The idea became deeply rooted in European culture during the Middle Ages. Food storage was crude, and cheese was often left out in cool cellars, making it one of the few foods rodents could easily reach. Over time, the connection between mice raiding food supplies and visible chunks of cheese led to the assumption that it was their preferred choice. Artists and later animators picked up on this simple visual cue because a mouse nibbling cheese was more recognizable than a mouse eating seeds or grains. Scientific studies reveal a different story. In controlled experiments where mice were given a range of foods, they consistently chose grains, fruits, and high carbohydrate options over cheese. While they can eat cheese if hungry, the high fat and protein content isn't what naturally attracts them. More importantly, strong-smelling cheeses can even repel mice, since their keen sense of smell makes pungent dairy overwhelming. One striking comparison highlights the difference. Place a piece of cheddar next to a pile of oats in a rodent enclosure, and mice will nearly always swarm the oats first. This preference matches their evolutionary history. Wild mice survived on seeds and plants, not dairy products, which would rarely have been available in nature. The enduring myth owes more to human storytelling and marketing than animal behavior. Cheese simply made for a better prop in comics and advertising than a bowl of grain. What actually matters is that if you're trying to lure or trap a mouse, peanut butter or cereal will be far more effective than a block of cheese. The correct understanding is that mice don't love cheese. They tolerate it at best. Bears hibernate by sleeping straight through winter. The common picture of a bear curling up in a den and sleeping without waking until spring is misleading. Bears do hibernate, but not in the way the myth suggests. The belief took hold in part because early naturalists lacked the tools to observe animals inside their dens. To outside observers, bears seemed to disappear during winter, and the simplest explanation was that they slept continuously. Children's books, cartoons, and even some educational materials reinforce this image, turning it into a familiar cultural story. Modern research paints a more accurate picture. Bears enter a state of torpor, a type of hibernation that lowers their body temperature, heart rate, and metabolism. Unlike smaller hibernators such as ground squirrels, bears do not become completely unresponsive. They can wake up, move around, and even give birth during this time. A 2001 study in Alaska fitted bears with monitoring devices and found that their heart rates could drop from over 50 beats per minute to as low as 8. Yet the animals still shifted positions and occasionally stirred when disturbed. One vivid example of this came from field biologists who discovered mother bears nursing newborn cubs inside dens in midwinter, clear evidence that the animals are not unconscious for months at a stretch. The cubs survive because their mother, though slowed, is still alert enough to care for them. The myth persists because deep sleep is easy to imagine, while the physiological reality is more complicated. Still, the details matter. Bears conserve energy without shutting down completely, giving them flexibility to respond to threats or care for young. In practice, this means hibernation is not a winter-long nap, but a finely tuned survival strategy that balances rest with readiness. The correct understanding is that bears endure winter in a state of suspended, but not total slumber. Run in a zigzag to escape a crocodile. One survival tip often repeated is that if a crocodile chases you on land, the best move is to run in a zigzag pattern. The claim is catchy, but it isn't supported by how crocodiles or humans actually move. The idea seems to have roots in local cautionary tales passed down in regions where crocodiles are common. Over time, travel guides and even television shows echoed the advice, presenting it as practical wisdom. The logic sounded convincing. Crocodiles have long, heavy bodies, so sharp turns might confuse them. But this explanation ignores the real strengths and limits of the animal. Scientific observation shows that crocodiles are built for short, powerful bursts, not long pursuits. On land, they can lunge quickly in a straight line, but they tire rapidly. Researchers who studied crocodile movement in Australia and Africa noted that while they can reach speeds up to 10 miles per hour for a few seconds, they cannot sustain a chase over distance. Humans, on the other hand, may not match the initial burst, but can easily outlast the animal in a sprint. What's more, weaving side to side slows a person down. Running in a zigzag gives up the very advantage humans have: speed and endurance. A clear, straight path away from the water is far safer. Wildlife experts emphasize that avoiding the animal's territory in the first place is the best protection. But if an encounter does happen, distance, not zigzags, is what saves lives. The myth persists because it offers a memorable image of cleverness against a predator, but it misleads people about what really works. The fact to remember is that the only effective escape strategy is to run straight and fast, putting as much ground as possible between you and the crocodile. Only humans use tools. It was once claimed that humans stood apart from the animal kingdom because we alone use tools. For a long time, this belief shaped how people defined intelligence and culture. The misconception gained traction in the 19th and early 20th centuries, when anthropologists and philosophers sought clear boundaries between humans and other animals. Tools became a convenient marker. After all, stone axes and crafted implements were evidence of civilization. Early textbooks repeated the claim, and it lingered in education and popular thought for generations. But the evidence from the natural world doesn't support it. In 1960, primatologist Jane Goodall observed chimpanzees in Tanzania stripping leaves from twigs and using them to fish termites out of mounds. This landmark discovery forced scientists to broaden the definition of tool use. Since then, researchers have documented a wide range of examples across species. Crows bend wires into hooks to retrieve food. Sea otters crack open shellfish with carefully chosen rocks. And dolphins carry sponges on their snouts to protect themselves while foraging along the seafloor. One particularly striking case comes from New Caledonian crows. In controlled experiments, these birds not only selected tools, but also shaped them for specific purposes, demonstrating foresight once thought unique to humans. Similar observations in capuchin monkeys, which use stones as hammers and anvils, reinforce the point. Tool use is not a human monopoly. The persistence of the myth reflects more about human pride than about animals. By overstating our uniqueness, earlier generations overlooked the complexity of other species' behavior. Modern science shows that intelligence and adaptability emerge in many forms across the animal world. The correct understanding is that humans are not the only tool users. We are simply the most elaborate at developing and passing those tools on. Bats are blind. The phrase, blind as a bat, gave rise to the belief that bats cannot see, but this picture of their abilities is simply wrong. The idea spread centuries ago, largely through folklore and literature. In the dark, bats darted through caves and night skies, guided by a sense invisible to humans. Observers, unable to explain such precise movement, assumed the animals must lack vision and instead rely entirely on sound, Over time, the phrase became a cultural shorthand, repeated in poems, plays, and everyday speech, until it shaped common belief. Modern biology provides a very different story. Bats do, in fact, have eyes, and those eyes work. While their eyesight is adapted for dim light rather than daylight detail, it is often better than that of humans in low-light conditions. A 2009 study of fruit bats, for example, showed that some species can see objects in both daylight and starlight levels, with colour sensitivity as well. Even echolocating bats, which use sound to navigate and hunt, rely on vision to detect larger landscapes, avoid predators, and orient over long distances. One striking case study comes from the Egyptian fruit bat. Researchers found that these bats switch between vision and echolocation depending on the environment, using sight in open spaces and sound in cluttered caves. This flexibility shows that echolocation is not a replacement for vision, but an additional sense layered on top. The persistence of the myth reflects more about human misunderstanding than bat biology. Because echolocation is extraordinary to us, people exaggerated its role and ignored the evidence of working eyes. The fact to remember is that bats are not blind. They are animals equipped with both sight and sound, fine-tuned for life in the dark, but never cut off from the power of vision. Bulls charge angrily at the colour red. The common claim is that bulls become enraged by the colour red, charging at it with fury. This image, repeated in bullfighting arenas and popular culture, is not supported by science. The myth traces back to Spain's centuries-old bullfighting tradition. Matadors used bright red capes, muletas, not to provoke bulls with colour, but to mask the sight of blood and heighten drama for the audience. Over time, spectators assumed the animals were reacting to the red itself. The theatre of the spectacle helped cement the idea, and it spread worldwide through films, posters, and cartoons. In reality, bulls, like other cattle, are dichromatic. They lack the retinal cones necessary to distinguish red from green, meaning the colour red appears to them as a shade of grey or brown. What actually triggers the charge is movement. Studies of cattle vision confirm this. When presented with still objects of various colours, bulls showed no special reaction. But when fabric was waved or flicked, regardless of colour, the animals responded aggressively. A striking example comes from controlled experiments where researchers replaced the traditional red cloth with blue or white. The bulls charged just as readily, proving that the stimulus was motion, not hue. Matadors and ranchers themselves recognize this. Training emphasizes cape technique, not color choice, as the key to steering a bull's attention. The myth endures because it fits a simple dramatic story. Red equals rage. It makes for memorable imagery, even though the biological reality is different. The fact to remember is that bulls are not angered by red. They are provoked by the swift, unpredictable movement of a target, no matter its color. In practice, this means the legend of the color red belongs to human storytelling, not to bovine behavior. Wearing hats causes baldness by blocking scalp airflow. The claim that wearing hats causes baldness by cutting off airflow to the scalp has been repeated for decades, but it doesn't match how hair loss works. This belief likely took root in the early 20th century, when hats were a daily accessory for men. As baldness became more visible among older generations, it was easy to blame the constant use of fedoras and caps. Barbershops and grooming manuals sometimes reinforced the idea, suggesting that the scalp needed to breathe. The logic sounded appealing, but it rested on a misunderstanding of basic biology. Hair follicles do not draw oxygen from the air around them. Instead, They are nourished through blood vessels under the skin. Covering the scalp with fabric does not reduce this supply. Scientific studies confirm that the most common form of baldness, male or female pattern hair loss, is tied to genetics and hormones, specifically sensitivity to dihydrotestosterone DHT. No amount of airflow, or lack of it, alters that process. One telling case comes from populations where head coverings are worn daily for cultural or religious reasons. Long-term studies in such groups show no difference in baldness rates compared with populations who rarely cover their heads. This demonstrates that hats, turbans, or scarves are not a driving factor in hair loss. The persistence of the myth stems from how visible hats once were in society and how natural it seemed to link them to a visible condition. But medical evidence makes the reality clear. Hair loss is internal, not the result of blocking air on the outside. The fact to remember is that hats don't cause baldness. In practice, this means choosing whether or not to wear one has no impact on keeping or losing hair. The tongue is the strongest muscle in the body. The statement that the tongue is the strongest muscle in the body has been repeated so often it sounds like fact, but the science doesn't support it. This misconception likely spread through classrooms and trivia books. The tongue is flexible, agile, and capable of constant movement without tiring, which gave it a reputation for being unusually powerful. Over time, its endurance was confused with strength, and the phrase was repeated until it became common knowledge. Looking at the biology reveals a different story. The tongue isn't a single muscle at all, but a group of 8 interwoven muscles working together. This unique structure makes it extremely versatile, allowing speech, swallowing, and fine control. But strength is measured by force output, and by that standard, the tongue does not come close to being the strongest. Other muscles easily surpass it. The gluteus maximus, for example, is the largest and provides the power to keep the body upright. The masseter, the jaw muscle, can exert hundreds of pounds of force, far beyond what the tongue can generate. Even the heart, though not measured in the same way, could be argued as the most powerful given its endurance and output over a lifetime. A 2005 physiology review emphasized that the tongue's claim to strength is misleading because endurance and dexterity are different qualities. What makes the tongue remarkable is its constant coordination, not raw power. One clear demonstration of this is how seamlessly it shifts between shaping words, tasting food, and moving liquids, tasks no other muscle group could perform as efficiently. The myth survives because the tongue feels important and impressive in daily life, but importance isn't the same as strength. The correct understanding is that the tongue is versatile and enduring, but it is not the body's strongest muscle. Humans have 206 bones from birth. It is often stated that humans are born with 206 bones, the same number adults have, but this is inaccurate. The skeletal system at birth is far more complex. The misconception likely stems from oversimplified teaching materials. Because 206 is the standard number cited for an adult skeleton, some textbooks and lessons mistakenly applied it to infants as well. This shortcut made anatomy easier to memorize but blurred an important detail about human development. In reality, newborns enter the world with closer to 270 bones. Many of these are small and separate, particularly in the skull and spine. They exist in greater numbers early on to provide flexibility, making childbirth possible and allowing for rapid growth during infancy. Over time, these bones fuse together. For example, the skull begins with multiple plates joined by soft gaps called fontanelles. These spaces gradually close as the child grows, forming the solid skull of adulthood. Similarly, several bones in the spine and pelvis merge to create larger, stronger structures. One vivid contrast comes from examining the sacrum, a bone at the base of the spine. In infants, it consists of 5 separate vertebrae, but by adulthood, they fuse into a single triangular bone. This shift, repeated across the body, is why the total number of bones decreases with age. Medical studies in pediatric orthopedics emphasize this process, not only to explain normal development, but also to track conditions where fusion doesn't occur as expected. Understanding the difference between infant and adult skeletons is more than trivia. It helps doctors recognize healthy growth patterns. The fact to remember is that babies are born with more than 200 bones, and the familiar number of 206 belongs only to the fully grown human skeleton. You have 10 times more bacterial cells than human cells. The claim that the human body contains 10 times more bacterial cells than human cells has been repeated in classrooms, documentaries, and even medical lectures. But the numbers behind it don't hold up. This misconception began with rough estimates made in the 1970s. Researchers, working with limited data, compared the number of bacteria in the gut to an assumed count of human cells. Their approximation, 10 bacteria for every 1 human cell, was never intended as a precise ratio, but the simplicity of the figure made it easy to remember and spread. Over time, it became a scientific fact in popular culture. More accurate studies in the past 2 decades have revised the picture. In 2016, a group of Israeli and Canadian scientists recalculated the ratio using modern imaging and cell counting techniques. They found that the typical adult has about 30 trillion human cells and roughly 38 trillion bacterial cells. Instead of being outnumbered 10 to 1, the balance is closer to 1 to 1. The numbers also shift throughout the day, since bacterial counts change depending on digestion, hydration, and other factors. One striking way to visualize this is by looking at body compartments. Red blood cells alone make up nearly 80% of all human cells, while gut bacteria account for most microbial cells. The comparison shows that the ratio is not universal across the body, but highly concentrated in certain regions. The older 10 to 1 figure persists because it captures attention, and exaggeration often sticks longer than nuance. Yet science benefits from accuracy, not catchphrases. The fact to remember is that human and bacterial cells exist in roughly equal numbers, forming a complex partnership rather than an overwhelming imbalance. In practice, this means the human body is not mostly bacteria. It is a balanced ecosystem. All arteries carry oxygenated blood, and all veins carry deoxygenated blood. The idea that arteries always carry oxygen-rich blood, while veins always carry oxygen-poor blood, is a common oversimplification. It shows up in diagrams, basic lessons, and even popular medical references, but it doesn't reflect the full reality of human circulation. The misconception took root because teaching materials often use color coding, arteries drawn in red, veins in blue. This simplified approach helped students visualize the system, but it led to a false absolute rule. Once repeated often enough, the distinction seemed universal when in fact it has important exceptions. The clearest example is the pulmonary system. The pulmonary artery, which carries blood from the heart to the lungs, transports deoxygenated blood. Meanwhile, the pulmonary veins return oxygenated blood from the lungs to the heart. This directly contradicts the idea that arteries always mean oxygen-rich and veins always mean oxygen-poor. scientific definitions make the picture clearer. An artery is defined by the direction it carries blood, away from the heart, while a vein carries blood toward the heart. Oxygen content depends on where that blood is coming from and where it is headed, not on whether the vessel is called an artery or a vein. One vivid case study comes from fetal circulation. In developing babies, the umbilical vein carries oxygenated blood from the placenta to the fetus, while the umbilical arteries carry deoxygenated blood back. This demonstrates again that vessel naming depends on flow direction, not oxygen levels. The myth lingers because color-coded charts are easy to remember, but precision matters in biology and medicine. The fact to remember is that arteries and veins are defined by direction of flow, not by oxygenation. In practice, this means the rule of red for oxygen and blue for waste is only a partial truth, not a universal law. Heavier objects fall faster than lighter ones. The long-standing belief that heavier objects fall faster than lighter ones has deep historical roots, but it does not match what physics tells us. This misconception can be traced back to Aristotle, who taught that the speed of a falling object was proportional to its weight. His view dominated European thought for nearly 2,000 years. It seemed intuitive. After all, a stone does hit the ground before a feather when dropped side by side. Without knowledge of air resistance, the explanation was persuasive and carried into common teaching. The turning point came in the late 16th century. Galileo challenged the Aristotelian view, famously testing falling objects from the Leaning Tower of Pisa, though his most important work was through controlled inclined plane experiments. His findings showed that in the absence of air resistance, objects accelerate at the same rate regardless of mass. Modern demonstrations make this clearer. In 1971, during the Apollo 15 mission, astronaut David Scott dropped a hammer and a feather on the moon. With no atmosphere to slow the feather, both hit the ground at the same time. That striking visual confirmed what centuries of physics had already established. The confusion persists because in everyday life, lighter objects like paper or feathers do fall slower, but only because air drags against them. A bowling ball and a baseball, however, fall at virtually the same speed when dropped together on Earth. Educational research shows that students often arrive with the heavier is faster assumption, proving how deeply the idea still lingers. The correct understanding is that gravity accelerates all masses equally, and only air resistance changes how we perceive the fall. What actually matters is distinguishing between the effect of weight and the effect of the medium an object moves through. There are only 3 states of matter. The claim that matter exists only in 3 states, solid, liquid, and gas, has been taught to generations of students, but it doesn't capture the full picture of physics. This simplified version of matter's behavior became popular in education because it was easy to explain. Teachers could point to ice, water, and steam as clear examples, making the 3 states model practical for classrooms. Over time, that simplicity hardened into the assumption that there were only 3, when science had already begun identifying more. Plasma is the most familiar 4th state. It occurs when gases are energized so much that electrons break free from atoms, creating a soup of charged particles. Far from rare, plasma makes up most of the visible universe. Stars, lightning, and neon signs are all examples. Despite this, plasma was often left out of early teaching materials, reinforcing the 3 states only idea. And plasma isn't the end of the story. Advances in physics have uncovered exotic states under extreme conditions. Bose-Einstein condensates, first observed in 1995, occur when atoms are cooled to near absolute zero and behave as a single quantum entity. Fermionic condensates, quark-gluon plasma, and supersolids are other examples, each existing in conditions far from everyday experience, but real nonetheless. One striking demonstration came from particle accelerators, where scientists recreated quark-gluon plasma, the state believed to have existed just after the Big Bang. These experiments showed that matter can exist in ways unimaginable within the ice-water-steam framework. The myth survives because everyday life only exposes us to 3 common forms, but the science is richer. The fact to remember is that matter takes on many states, from the plasma in stars to the condensates in supercooled labs. In practice, this means the old 3 states model is only the beginning. The ocean is blue because it reflects the sky. The belief that the ocean looks blue simply because it reflects the sky has been passed down for generations, but it doesn't explain what's really happening. This idea spread because it seemed to fit everyday observation. On a clear day, the ocean appears deep blue, while on cloudy days it often looks grey. For teachers and storytellers, the link between sky and sea was an easy shortcut. Over time, the simple reflection explanation became accepted, even though it left out the role of light itself. Scientific evidence reveals that water has its own colour. When sunlight enters the ocean, it interacts with the water molecules. Light is made up of many colours, and water absorbs the longer wavelengths, reds, oranges and yellows, more quickly. The shorter blue wavelengths scatter back, giving the ocean its characteristic hue. The deeper and purer the water, the more intense the blue appears. A vivid demonstration of this came from experiments in controlled tanks of pure water. Even without a sky to reflect, the liquid still appeared blue when illuminated, confirming that the colour comes from absorption and scattering rather than reflection. Satellite imaging of oceans further supports this, showing variations in shade linked to depth, clarity, and the presence of microscopic organisms, not the colour of the sky above. The myth persists because reflection does play a minor role near the surface, especially when the water is calm. But it's not the main driver of ocean colour. What actually matters is the physics of light passing through water. The fact to remember is that the sea is blue not because it mirrors the sky, but because of how water selectively absorbs and scatters sunlight. In practice, this means the ocean carries its own colour, independent of what hangs above it. Clouds are weightless. It is often assumed that clouds are weightless, floating effortlessly across the sky like puffs of air. But in truth, clouds carry enormous weight. The misconception took hold because clouds appear light and delicate. From the ground, they drift slowly and change shape with ease, giving the impression of softness without substance. Artists, poets, and even early science writers leaned into that image, describing clouds as airy and insubstantial. The visual impression was convincing enough that the idea stuck. Scientific measurements tell a very different story. Clouds are made of tiny droplets of liquid water and ice crystals suspended in the air. While each droplet is microscopic, together they add up. A typical cumulus cloud, the fluffy kind often seen on summer afternoons, can contain hundreds of tons of water. A 2008 study by the US Geological Survey estimated that a single fair-weather cumulus cloud may weigh as much as 1.1 million pounds. That's the equivalent of hundreds of elephants floating overhead. What keeps this massive weight aloft is not a lack of gravity, but the balance of forces in the atmosphere. Rising warm air currents hold the droplets suspended, and their small size makes them fall extremely slowly. To the human eye, the result looks like effortless drifting, but it is really a dynamic balance of physics. The myth continues because the mind struggles to connect what looks soft and fluffy with something so heavy. Yet the evidence is clear. Clouds are among the heaviest things in the sky. The fact to remember is that clouds are not weightless at all. They are vast collections of water held up by air currents. In practice, this means every calm, floating cloud carries with it the hidden mass of a small lake. Ocean tides are caused only by the moon. It is often said that ocean tides are caused only by the moon, but this overlooks an important part of the story. The belief became widespread because the moon's pull on Earth is obvious and easy to explain. Textbooks, children's science shows, and simple diagrams often highlight the moon as the cause, leaving out the additional forces at play. Over time, this shorthand teaching turned into the mistaken idea that the moon alone drives the rhythm of the tides. In reality, both the moon and the sun influence Earth's oceans. The moon's gravitational pull is stronger because it is closer, but the sun's gravity, though spread over a greater distance, still plays a major role. When the sun, moon, and Earth align during full or new moons, their combined pull creates spring tides, higher highs, and lower lows. When the sun and moon are at right angles to Earth, they partially cancel each other out, producing neap tides with a smaller range. Scientific data collected from tide gauges around the world confirms this interplay. For example, coastal records from the Pacific and Atlantic show tidal variations closely matching both lunar cycles and solar positioning. Without accounting for the sun, these patterns cannot be fully explained. A striking demonstration comes during solar eclipses, when the alignment of sun and moon intensifies tidal extremes. Mariners and coastal engineers factor both bodies into their models, knowing that overlooking the sun would make tidal predictions inaccurate. The myth survives because the moon's role is easier to visualize, but the truth is more balanced. The fact to remember is that tides result from the combined gravitational effects of both the moon and the sun. In practice, this means Earth's oceans respond not to one cosmic partner, but to two working together. A compass points to true north. It is often assumed that a compass points directly to true north, but that's not the case. This misunderstanding likely spread because early explorers and map makers used compasses as their primary navigation tools. To those relying on them, the needles seem to line up neatly with the top of a map. Over time, the difference between true north, the geographic pole, and magnetic north, the direction a compass actually points, was overlooked or simplified in explanations. In reality, a compass aligns with Earth's magnetic field, not its axis of rotation. Magnetic north lies in the Canadian Arctic and is constantly shifting due to changes in Earth's molten iron core. The discrepancy between true north and magnetic north is known as magnetic declination, and it varies depending on where you are. In some places, the difference is only a degree or two, while in others, it can reach more than 20 degrees. A striking real-world example came from polar expeditions in the 19th century. Navigators who followed their compasses without correction found themselves veering off course by miles. Modern cartography accounts for this by printing declination values on maps, allowing users to adjust their bearings. The US Geological Survey and similar agencies worldwide regularly update these values because magnetic north drifts by dozens of kilometers each year. Scientific tracking shows that magnetic north has been moving steadily from Canada toward Russia at a rate of about 55 kilometers per year in recent decades. This shift means that anyone relying solely on a compass without considering declination can end up significantly misaligned. The fact to remember is that a compass points to magnetic north, not true north. In practice, This means accurate navigation requires adjusting for the difference, a small correction that can make the difference between staying on course or getting lost. Mercury is the hottest planet. It is often said that Mercury, being closest to the Sun, must also be the hottest planet. But proximity alone doesn't determine planetary temperature. The misconception spread because, at first glance, it seems logical. Early astronomy texts often simplified the solar system by linking distance with heat. Mercury, small and airless, appeared the obvious candidate. Without detailed temperature data, this assumption stuck and was repeated in schools and popular science writing for decades. Modern measurements tell a different story. Mercury does reach scorching daytime highs of around 430 degrees Celsius, 800 degrees Fahrenheit. But without a significant atmosphere, it cannot trap heat. At night, its surface plunges to minus 180 degrees Celsius, minus 290 degrees Fahrenheit. The extreme swings mean Mercury is not consistently the hottest. Venus, on the other hand, maintains surface temperatures of about 465 degrees Celsius, 870 degrees Fahrenheit, day and night, across its entire surface. The reason lies in Venus's dense atmosphere. Composed mostly of carbon dioxide, with thick clouds of sulfuric acid, it creates a runaway greenhouse effect. Sunlight penetrates the atmosphere, heating the surface, but the heat cannot escape back into space. As a result, Venus is hotter than Mercury, despite being nearly twice as far from the Sun. A striking comparison came from NASA's Magellan mission in the 1990s, which mapped Venus's surface using radar. The data revealed a uniform oven-like planet where even metals like lead would melt. Meanwhile, Mercury's temperature varies wildly, depending on whether it faces the Sun or not. The myth survives because closest to the Sun feels like a simple explanation, but it misses how atmospheres control climate. The fact to remember is that Venus, not Mercury, holds the record as the hottest planet. In practice, this means distance from the Sun is less important than how a planet traps and retains heat. The Sun is yellow. The Sun is often described as yellow, a belief reinforced by art, culture, and even early science lessons. But the true colour of our star is not yellow at all. This idea spread largely through human perception. When viewed from Earth's surface, sunlight passes through the atmosphere, which scatters shorter wavelengths like blue and green. What remains is a warmer hue, giving the Sun a yellowish appearance, especially at sunrise or sunset. Paintings, children's books, and even national flags cemented this image, making the yellow Sun part of global culture. Scientific measurement, however, shows a different reality. The Sun emits light across the visible spectrum, peaking in the green portion, but spreading broadly enough to appear white when combined. Astronomers classify it as a G-type main sequence star, and its surface temperature, about 5,800 Kelvin, corresponds to white light, not yellow. Photographs taken from space, free of Earth's filtering atmosphere, confirm this. The Sun shines as a bright white star. A striking example comes from astronauts aboard the International Space Station. Their images of the Sun show no golden tint, but a clear, blinding white. Likewise, satellite instruments such as those on NASA's Solar Dynamics Observatory record its true emission without atmospheric distortion. The persistence of the yellow sun myth reflects how human eyes and cultural symbols shape understanding. For thousands of years, people relied on what they could see from the ground, and what they saw was filtered light. But science distinguishes between appearance and reality. The fact to remember is that the Sun is not yellow. It is white radiating all visible wavelengths together. In practice, this means that our star looks coloured only because of Earth's atmosphere, not because its light is inherently golden. The phases of the moon are caused by Earth's shadow. The claim that the moon's phases are caused by Earth's shadow has been passed along in classrooms and common speech, but it does not match how the moon actually changes shape in our sky. This misunderstanding likely arose because lunar eclipses, the rare moments when Earth's shadow does fall on the moon, look dramatic and memorable. People connected that image with the more regular pattern of waxing and waning and assumed the same cause was at work. Over centuries, the simpler explanation stuck, reinforced by cultural stories and illustrations that blurred the difference between phases and eclipses. Science shows a very different process. The phases of the moon are caused by its orbit around Earth. As the moon circles our planet roughly once every 29.5 days, the angle between the sun, Earth, and moon changes. Half of the moon is always lit by the sun, but from our perspective on Earth, we see varying portions of that lit half. This gradual shift creates the familiar sequence: new moon, crescent, first quarter, gibbous, and full. A vivid contrast comes when comparing the cycle of phases with the timing of eclipses. Lunar eclipses only occur a few times a year, and only when the sun, Earth, and moon line up precisely. By contrast, phases are predictable and continuous, unaffected by Earth's shadow. Astronomical records and orbital models confirm this distinction with exact regularity. The persistence of the shadow explanation reflects how human observation favours visible drama over invisible geometry. But careful study shows the geometry is the key. The fact to remember is that Earth's shadow explains eclipses, not phases. In practice, this means the moon's monthly cycle comes from its orbit and sunlight, not from being hidden in Earth's shadow. Black holes suck everything like giant vacuums. The common belief is that black holes act like cosmic vacuums, sucking in everything nearby. It's an image that makes for dramatic storytelling, but it doesn't reflect how gravity actually works. The idea gained traction through science fiction in the mid-20th century. Films, comic books, and magazine covers often showed spaceships being dragged helplessly into dark voids. The name black hole itself, introduced in the 1960s, added to the mystery and made it easy for people to imagine them as all-devouring pits in space. In truth, a black hole's gravity follows the same rules as any other object. If the sun were replaced by a black hole of identical mass, Earth would continue to orbit in exactly the same way. It wouldn't suddenly be swallowed. What sets black holes apart is their density. Mass concentrated so tightly that once something crosses the event horizon, not even light can escape. But outside that boundary, their gravitational pull is no different from a star or planet of equal mass. Observations of Sagittarius. A star, the supermassive black hole at the centre of the Milky Way, provide clear evidence. Astronomers have tracked stars orbiting close to it for decades, and rather than being dragged in, they follow stable, predictable paths. These stars demonstrate that black holes do not indiscriminately suck everything around them. They behave as gravitational anchors, just with an extreme interior boundary. The persistence of the vacuum image comes from the need for simple, striking visuals, not from physics. Black holes are dangerous, but only if you venture too close to their event horizon. The fact to remember is that they don't act like space vacuums. In practice, they are incredibly dense objects whose gravity shapes orbits, not cosmic drains pulling everything inside. A human body would explode in space without a suit. The claim that a person would instantly explode if exposed to the vacuum of space without a suit has been repeated in movies and television, but it isn't what actually happens. This myth, spread through popular culture, especially mid-20th century science fiction, which favored shocking visuals over scientific accuracy. Writers and filmmakers imagined the absence of pressure as so extreme that the body would burst apart. The dramatic image stuck in the public imagination, even as research provided a more accurate picture. Scientific evidence shows that the human body is more resilient than that. Skin, muscle, and connective tissues are strong enough to hold everything in place, even without external air pressure. What does happen is swelling. Gases inside the body expand, causing tissues to puff up, but not rupture. The real danger is rapid oxygen loss. Within 10 to 15 seconds, a person would lose consciousness from hypoxia. NASA gained direct insight from a 1965 accident in which a technician's suit depressurized during a vacuum chamber test. He lost consciousness, but was revived after being repressurized within a minute. He later recalled feeling the saliva on his tongue begin to boil, a vivid but non-lethal effect of exposure to near vacuum. Experiments and accident reports confirm that the lethal threats in space are lack of oxygen, decompression sickness, and radiation, not explosion. Survival for short spans, up to about 30 seconds, is possible if repressurization happens quickly. The persistence of the exploding astronaut image owes more to cinematic storytelling than to physiology. The fact to remember is that the human body does not explode in space. In practice, death would come from suffocation and swelling, not bursting apart. The correct understanding is that space is lethal, but in quieter, less dramatic ways than Hollywood once imagined. Mount Everest is the closest point on Earth to space. It's often claimed that Mount Everest, being the tallest mountain above sea level, is the closest point on Earth to space. But measuring height this way overlooks the true shape of our planet. The misconception spread because Everest's elevation of 8,849 meters makes it the highest peak relative to sea level, a standard used on maps and in exploration history. Early climbers and geographers celebrated it as the highest point on Earth, and the phrase stuck. Over time, people began to assume that meant Everest was also the closest spot to space. In reality, Earth is not a perfect sphere. It bulges slightly at the equator due to its rotation, making the planet an oblate spheroid. Because of this bulge, locations along the equator extend farther from Earth's center than points near the poles, even if their elevation is lower. This is where Mount Chimborazo in Ecuador comes in. Rising to just over 6,200 meters above sea level, it is shorter than Everest by more than 2 kilometers. But Chimborazo sits almost directly on the equator, where Earth's bulge adds an extra 21 kilometers of distance from the center. As a result, its summit is about 2 kilometers farther into space than Everest's. A striking comparison comes from satellite measurements. Geodesists using GPS and laser altimetry have confirmed that Chimborazo, not Everest, holds the title of being the farthest point from Earth's core and therefore the closest to outer space. Everest remains the highest above sea level, but not the most outward-reaching. The myth persists because highest mountain sounds absolute, yet it depends on how you measure. The fact to remember is that Everest is tallest relative to sea level, but Chimborazo is closest to space. In practice, this means highest and farthest are not the same thing. Diamonds come from compressed coal. The familiar claim that diamonds are formed from compressed coal sounds logical, but geology tells a very different story. This idea spread in the 19th and early 20th centuries when coal mining was a major industry and the connection between carbon-rich materials seemed intuitive. Popular science writers and advertisements often link the two. presenting coal as the humble beginning of nature's most prized gemstone. The narrative was simple and appealing, but it didn't match the geological evidence. Diamonds form deep in Earth's mantle, more than 140 kilometers below the surface, under immense pressure and temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius. The carbon that makes up diamonds comes from primordial sources, locked into Earth during its early formation, not from ancient plant matter. Coal, by contrast, forms relatively close to the surface from decayed vegetation in sedimentary rock layers. The two materials originate in completely different environments that never overlap. Scientific studies of diamond inclusions, tiny trapped minerals inside the crystals, confirm their mantle origins. Some diamonds are even older than the earliest land plants, meaning they could not possibly have come from coal deposits. A striking example comes from diamonds found in South Africa, dated to over 3 billion years ago, long before coal could exist. The persistence of the coal-to-diamond myth reflects cultural storytelling more than science. Coal was a symbol of everyday labor, while diamonds symbolized beauty and wealth. Linking the two offered a powerful metaphor of transformation. But the geology makes clear that coal has nothing to do with diamond formation. The fact to remember is that diamonds come from carbon in Earth's deep mantle, not from compressed coal. In practice, this means the glittering stones on the surface are born of ancient planetary processes, not buried forests turned to rock. Diamonds are rare in nature. It is often claimed that diamonds are exceptionally rare in nature, but their scarcity has been exaggerated by marketing more than geology. This misconception gained momentum in the 20th century when diamond companies, most notably De Beers, tightly controlled supply. By releasing limited quantities into the market, they created the illusion of rarity. The "A Diamond is Forever" campaign tied the stone to love and status, further cementing its reputation as an extraordinary treasure. Over time, people came to equate diamonds with natural scarcity, even though production numbers told a different story. Geological surveys show that diamonds are not as rare as once believed. Every year, hundreds of millions of carats are mined worldwide, primarily from kimberlite pipes in Africa, Russia, Canada, and Australia. While gem-quality stones are less common than industrial-grade ones, the sheer volume demonstrates that diamonds occur in large quantities compared to truly rare minerals. For instance, minerals like painite or musgravite are thousands of times scarcer than diamonds, yet they receive far less public attention. One striking example is Botswana's diamond industry. The country has consistently produced tens of millions of carats annually, with vast reserves still untapped. This scale of extraction shows that diamonds are abundant enough to support global jewelry and industrial markets without risk of depletion in the near future. The persistence of the rare diamond myth is a testament to the power of storytelling and economic control rather than geology. By associating diamonds with rarity, the industry ensured their high value in the public mind. The fact to remember is that diamonds are common compared to truly scarce minerals. In practice, this means their high price reflects controlled supply and cultural demand, not an actual shortage in nature. Most deserts are scorching seas of sand. The common picture of deserts as endless seas of scorching sand is a distorted one. While sand dunes do exist, they represent only a fraction of what deserts truly are. This misconception spread through centuries of storytelling and imagery. Early explorers crossing the Sahara described vast dunes, and artists, writers, and later Hollywood films amplified those images. Over time, the sandy desert became the default visual, even though it was never the full reality. By definition, A desert is not about heat or sand, but about dryness. It is an area that receives less than 250 millimeters of rainfall per year. This means deserts can be cold, rocky, or even icy. In fact, the largest deserts on Earth are Antarctica and the Arctic. Both are classified as deserts because of their extremely low precipitation, even though they are covered in ice rather than sand. Scientific surveys estimate that only about 1/5 of the world's deserts are dominated by sand. Much larger portions consist of gravel plains, bare rock, or sparse vegetation. The Gobi Desert in Asia, for instance, is mostly dry grasslands and rocky terrain, while much of the American Southwest features canyons and scrub rather than dunes. One striking example is Antarctica, where average temperatures plunge below -50 degrees Celsius. Yet by the strict definition, it is a desert, larger and drier than the Sahara. This challenges the cultural stereotype of deserts as blisteringly hot wastelands. The sandy, sun-scorched image persists because it is dramatic and visually simple, but the scientific definition is broader. The fact to remember is that deserts are defined by aridity, not by sand or heat. In practice, this means the world's deserts include icy poles, rocky highlands, and scrublands alongside the famous dunes. Spiders are insects. It is often assumed that spiders are insects, but biology places them in a very different group. The confusion likely spread because spiders and insects are both small, many-legged creatures that live in similar environments. Early naturalists lumped them together, and popular culture reinforced the mistake. Children's books, cartoons, and even product labels often referred to all bugs as insects, with spiders casually included. Over time, the oversimplification blurred the actual distinction. Scientific classification separates spiders from insects at the class level. Insects belong to Insecta, while spiders belong to Arachnida. The differences are clear when examined closely. Insects have 3 body segments, head, thorax, and abdomen, whereas spiders have only 2, the cephalothorax and abdomen. Insects almost always have 6 legs, while spiders have 8. Insects typically possess antennae and wings. Spiders have neither. One vivid comparison can be seen in their development. Many insects go through metamorphosis, transforming from larvae into adults with wings. Spiders, in contrast, grow by molting their exoskeletons, never developing wings at all. Their physiology also differs. Spiders produce silk from spinnerets, and many have venom glands adapted for immobilizing prey, features not found in insects. Research into evolutionary history underscores this divide. Fossil evidence shows that arachnids branched off from a different lineage of arthropods hundreds of millions of years ago, long before the first true insects appeared. This makes spiders more closely related to scorpions and ticks than to beetles or butterflies. The persistence of the myth reflects how humans categorize based on surface traits rather than deeper anatomy. But science provides a sharper lens. The fact to remember is that spiders are arachnids, not insects. In practice, this means treating them as a separate branch of the arthropod family tree, with their own unique adaptations. Polar bear fur is white. It is commonly said that polar bears have white fur, but under closer examination, their hair is not truly white at all. The idea spread because polar bears blend seamlessly into snowy Arctic landscapes. To human eyes, their coats appear white in the same way snow or clouds do, by scattering visible light. Photographs, nature documentaries, and even toys and mascots reinforce this perception, making white fur the default description. In reality, each hair on a polar bear is transparent and hollow. The strands have no pigment, meaning they contain no color of their own. Instead, the structure of the fur scatters light in all directions, producing the white appearance. This effect is similar to how crushed ice or frosted glass looks white, even though it is colorless. Scientific studies using microscopes and spectroscopy have confirmed the transparent nature of polar bear hairs. Under certain conditions, their coats can even take on a yellowish tint from environmental staining or appear green when algae grow inside the hollow shafts in captivity. These variations highlight that the whiteness is an optical illusion rather than an inherent trait of the fur itself. Another striking fact is that beneath their fur, polar bears have black skin. This helps them absorb and retain heat from the sun, a crucial adaptation in their frigid environment. The transparent fur works as insulation and camouflage, not as a pigment-based color. The persistence of the white fur myth reflects how human perception simplifies complex natural adaptations. The truth is both more interesting and more accurate. The fact to remember is that polar bear fur is clear, not white. In practice, this means their famous snowy appearance comes from the way light interacts with their hair, not from any natural pigment. Bamboo is a tree. It is often assumed that bamboo is a tree, largely because of its towering height and woody stems. But scientifically, bamboo belongs to a very different category. The misconception spread through everyday observation and language. In many cultures, bamboo groves were described alongside forests of oaks and pines, and their tall, jointed stalks looked tree-like to the human eye. Builders used bamboo in place of timber, reinforcing the idea that it was simply another kind of tree. Over time, the visual resemblance and practical use blurred its true classification. Botanically, bamboo is a grass. It belongs to the family Poaceae, the same group as wheat, corn, and rice. Unlike trees, bamboo does not grow by adding rings of wood each year. Its stems, called culms, are hollow and segmented, sprouting from underground rhizomes that spread quickly. This structure makes bamboo the fastest growing plant on Earth, with some species capable of rising more than a meter in a single day. No tree grows in such a way. Scientific research into bamboo anatomy confirms its grassy identity. Instead of woody tissue arranged in concentric rings, bamboo has scattered vascular bundles, a hallmark of grasses. Its reproductive cycle also differs from trees. Many bamboo species flower only once in decades, then die back entirely, a strategy more common to grasses than to woody plants. A striking contrast is that while hardwood trees can take decades or centuries to mature, bamboo can be harvested in just a few years. This rapid renewal is why it has become a cornerstone of sustainable construction and manufacturing. The myth persists because bamboo looks and behaves like a tree in daily life. The correct understanding is that bamboo is a giant grass. In practice, this means it is both unique and highly renewable, but not a tree. Stainless steel does not rust. It is commonly said that stainless steel does not rust, but this is only partly true. Under the right conditions, stainless steel can and does corrode. The misconception spread because stainless steel was marketed in the early 20th century as a miracle metal. Compared to ordinary steel, it resisted stains and rust far better, making it a staple in cutlery, medical tools, and architecture. Over time, the marketing shorthand of "does not rust" turned into a blanket belief, even though engineers and metallurgists knew the reality was more nuanced. Scientifically, stainless steel resists corrosion because it contains chromium. When exposed to oxygen, chromium forms a thin, invisible oxide layer on the surface. This layer protects the underlying metal from reacting with water and oxygen, preventing the rapid rusting seen in regular steel. But if the protective layer is damaged or the environment is especially harsh, such as exposure to salt water, chlorine, or industrial pollutants, the steel can still rust. One striking example is marine environments. Shipbuilders and offshore engineers have long documented how stainless steel fittings corrode faster at sea. In 2017, a study in the Journal of Materials Engineering showed that certain grades of stainless steel, when placed in salt water, developed visible rust within weeks. The corrosion didn't spread as aggressively as with normal steel, but it disproved the idea of total immunity. The myth persists because most everyday uses, like kitchen sinks or surgical instruments, rarely show rust, reinforcing the illusion of permanence. Yet industrial experience tells a different story. The fact to remember is that stainless steel is highly resistant but not rust-proof. In practice, this means choosing the right grade of stainless steel and proper maintenance are essential for long-term durability, especially in tough environments. Newton discovered gravity when an apple hit his head. Newton discovered gravity when an apple hit his head. The well-known story claims that Isaac Newton discovered gravity when an apple struck him on the head. It's a memorable tale, but not what really happened. This version became popular because it turned a complex scientific breakthrough into a simple, almost comical anecdote. Biographers in the 18th century began retelling Newton's reflections about an apple in increasingly dramatic ways. By the time the story entered school books and popular culture, the falling apple had been upgraded into a head-smacking revelation, easier to teach and easier to remember. The truth, according to Newton's own recollections, is quieter and more thoughtful. In a conversation with his friend William Stukeley in 1726, Newton described sitting in his garden and seeing an apple fall. The sight led him to wonder why apples always fall straight down, never sideways or upward. This ordinary observation sparked deeper thinking about the universal force that pulls objects toward Earth and keeps celestial bodies, like the moon, in orbit. No impact was mentioned. What followed was not an instant discovery, but years of mathematical work and comparison with astronomical data. Newton developed the law of universal gravitation by linking the fall of objects on Earth with the motion of the heavens, showing that the same force governs both. It was methodical reasoning, not a sudden accident, that produced one of science's greatest insights. The myth endures because people prefer moments of inspiration that come as lightning strikes, or in this case, as an apple bonk. But the reality honors Newton's persistence and intellect more than the legend does. The fact to remember is that Newton was inspired by watching an apple fall, not by being hit. In practice, this means great discoveries usually emerge from long study and reflection, not single dramatic moments. NASA spent millions on a space pen while the Soviets used pencils. The story often told is that NASA wasted millions of taxpayer dollars developing a special space pen, while the Soviets simply used pencils. It's a tidy tale of bureaucratic excess versus common sense, but it doesn't hold up under scrutiny. This myth spread during the Cold War, when comparisons between American and Soviet space programs were common. The image of over-engineered American technology versus Soviet pragmatism fit neatly into cultural narratives and was repeated in books, articles, and later on the internet. The exaggeration stuck because it sounded both humorous and believable. The reality is quite different. In the early days, both NASA and the Soviet space program did use pencils. But pencils created problems. broken graphite tips and shavings could float in zero gravity, posing hazards to astronauts and sensitive electronics. Graphite is also flammable, a serious risk inside oxygen-rich spacecraft. Enter Paul C. Fisher, an independent inventor. In 1965, he developed the Fisher Space Pen using his own funds, not NASA's budget. The pen used pressurized ink cartridges that worked in zero gravity, underwater, and in extreme temperatures. After rigorous testing, NASA began purchasing them, not at millions of dollars, but at a modest cost of a few dollars each. The Soviets, recognizing the same benefits, adopted the same pens by the late 1960s. A striking fact is that the space pen was a private innovation, later embraced by both sides of the space race. It was never a symbol of government waste, but of clever engineering solving a real problem. The myth survives because it offers a simple, ironic contrast that's easy to retell. The fact to remember is that both Americans and Soviets used the same pen, and it wasn't developed with NASA's money. In practice, this means the space pen versus pencil story is more legend than history. Undercover police have to identify themselves if you ask them directly. The claim that undercover police officers must reveal their identity if asked directly has circulated for decades, but it has no basis in law. This misconception spread largely through movies, television, and word of mouth. Crime dramas often portrayed characters exposing an officer by simply asking, "Are you a cop?" and receiving an incriminating answer. The scene made for dramatic storytelling and was repeated so often that it began to sound like a real legal safeguard. The truth is more complex. Courts have consistently ruled that police are permitted to use deception during investigations. Undercover officers are not required to admit their identity, even if asked. Their effectiveness relies on blending in, and being forced to reveal themselves would make undercover operations impossible. Entrapment laws do exist, but they focus on whether police induced someone to commit a crime they otherwise would not have committed, not whether an officer lied about who they were. One striking real-world case involves undercover narcotics operations. Officers often spend months embedded in criminal networks, posing as buyers or dealers. If simply being asked, "Are you a cop?" required honesty, entire investigations would collapse instantly. Legal precedents across the United States, Canada, and Europe all confirm that deception in undercover work is lawful. The persistence of the myth reflects a desire for simple protections against surveillance and policing. It feels comforting to imagine a rule that levels the playing field, but reality offers no such shortcut. The fact to remember is that undercover officers are not legally bound to reveal themselves if asked. In practice, this means that pop culture's dramatic cop test is just that, a fiction, not a legal right. The correct understanding is that undercover work depends on secrecy, not disclosure. Waking a sleepwalker is deadly or very dangerous. The claim that waking a sleepwalker is deadly or highly dangerous has been repeated for generations, but the science of sleep doesn't support it. This belief spread through folklore and cautionary advice passed down in families. Parents and caregivers were often told to never disturb a sleepwalker, warning of dire consequences if they did. Popular culture added to the fear. Cartoons, movies, and novels dramatized the image of a sleepwalker in peril, reinforcing the idea that waking them could be fatal. In reality, medical research shows that waking a sleepwalker is not dangerous in itself. Sleepwalking occurs during deep non-REM sleep, when parts of the brain are still resting, even as the body moves. If awakened, the person may feel confused, disoriented, or startled. but they are not at risk of heart attacks or sudden death. A 2012 study published in Neurology found that while sleepwalkers may experience violent arousals or confusion upon waking, no evidence suggests serious medical danger from the act itself. The true risks come not from waking the sleepwalker, but from what they might do while still asleep. Sleepwalkers have been documented leaving their homes, attempting to cook, or even driving cars. In these cases, the danger lies in injury from the environment, not from being awakened. Doctors often recommend gently guiding a sleepwalker back to bed, or if necessary, waking them carefully to prevent harm. The persistence of the myth reflects a preference for simple warnings over nuanced explanations. It was easier to say, "never wake them," than to explain the subtleties of sleep science. The fact to remember is that waking a sleepwalker is not deadly. It may only confuse them. In practice, what actually matters is keeping the sleepwalker safe from accidents until they return to normal rest. You sneeze with your eyes open and they'll pop out. The warning that if you sneeze with your eyes open, they'll pop out has been repeated for decades, but it isn't true. This misconception spread through a mix of folklore and exaggeration. Because sneezes are forceful and automatic, people assumed the pressure might be strong enough to push the eyes out of their sockets. Parents repeated the warning as a way to keep children from experimenting, and pop culture picked it up as a quirky fact. Over time, the idea stuck, despite a lack of evidence. The science tells a different story. Sneezing does generate pressure, but that pressure is directed through the nasal passages and mouth, not behind the eyes. The eyes are secured by strong muscles, connective tissue, and the optic nerve. According to ophthalmologists, these structures make accidental eye displacement from a sneeze essentially impossible. Even in rare medical cases where eyes partially dislocate, it requires trauma, not something as routine as sneezing. Research has shown that the reflex to close your eyes during a sneeze is just that, a reflex. It helps protect the eyes from expelled particles and potential irritants. Some people can sneeze with their eyes open, and when they do, nothing dangerous happens. The reflex makes eye closing automatic for most, but it is not tied to preventing them from popping out. One striking comparison is with people who have undergone eye surgery. Even with weakened tissues, patients are not warned that sneezing could dislodge their eyes, underscoring how robust the anatomy actually is. The myth persists because it combines humor with a hint of fear, making it easy to remember. The fact to remember is that sneezing won't eject your eyes. In practice, the reflexive eye closing is protective, not life-saving, and your eyes are safe either way. Houseflies live only 24 hours. It is often claimed that houseflies live for only 24 hours, but this short lifespan belongs more to myth than biology. The belief likely spread through casual teaching and simplified trivia. A single day of life made houseflies sound almost poetic, brief, fleeting, and forgettable. The idea was catchy enough to appear in classrooms, fact books, and even advertising. Over time, the exaggeration was mistaken for truth. Scientific research shows that the common housefly, Musca domestica, lives far longer. From egg to adult, its full life cycle takes several weeks. Once mature, the adult fly typically survives 15 to 30 days, depending on food supply, temperature, and environmental conditions. Laboratory studies confirm that under favorable circumstances, some flies can even live up to 2 months. This is far more time than the single day often cited. One striking comparison is with the mayfly, an insect whose adult stage truly does last only about 24 hours. It is likely that confusion between the short-lived mayfly and the housefly helped fuel the misconception. Unlike mayflies, which emerge only to mate and die, houseflies actively feed, reproduce, and interact with their environment over several weeks. The persistence of the one-day fly story may also reflect a cultural desire to downplay pests. The idea that flies vanish after a day is easier to tolerate than the reality that they can linger, reproduce rapidly, and spread disease over the course of a month. Pest control experts and entomologists stress this longer lifespan when explaining why infestations require serious attention. The fact to remember is that houseflies live for weeks, not hours. In practice, this means they have ample time to breed and spread germs, which is why sanitation and prevention remain key to controlling them. The Earth is flat. The claim that the Earth is flat has persisted for centuries in some circles, but the evidence against it is overwhelming. The misconception has deep historical roots. In ancient times, many cultures described the world as a flat disk, often supported by mythological creatures or floating in a cosmic sea. These ideas made sense without global travel or advanced astronomy. Even as early Greek philosophers like Pythagoras and Aristotle argued for a spherical Earth, the simpler flat Earth imagery remained powerful in folklore and tradition. In modern times, conspiracy theories and internet communities have revived the notion, often framing it as resistance to mainstream science. Scientific evidence, however, paints a consistent picture. As early as the 3rd century BCE, Eratosthenes measured the Earth's circumference using the differing angles of sunlight in 2 cities. His calculation came remarkably close to the true value. During lunar eclipses, Earth casts a curved shadow on the Moon, further proving its roundness. In the modern era, satellites and space travel have provided direct photographs of our planet, showing its curvature from orbit. A striking real-world example is global navigation. Airplanes and ships plot routes based on a spherical Earth. The shortest path between continents, the Great Circle Route, only makes sense if the planet is round. GPS, communication satellites, and even weather prediction all rely on Earth's shape being an oblate spheroid, slightly flattened at the poles and bulging at the equator. The persistence of flat Earth claims reflects cultural mistrust rather than scientific reality. The correct understanding is clear. The Earth is round, and centuries of observation and measurement confirm it. In practice, this means that science, navigation, and everyday technology all depend on a spherical planet, not a flat one. Sharks must keep moving, or they die instantly. The belief that sharks must keep swimming constantly, or they will die on the spot, has circulated for decades, but it oversimplifies how sharks actually breathe. The myth spread through documentaries and popular culture that often emphasize the image of sharks as relentless movers. The phrase restless predator became a shorthand description, and many assumed the constant motion was a matter of life or death. Movies like Jaws further cemented the idea that sharks never stop moving, turning it into common knowledge. In reality, different species of sharks use different methods to breathe. Some do rely on a process called ram ventilation, where water flows over their gills only as they swim forward. For these species, such as great white sharks, constant movement is indeed necessary to keep oxygen circulating. But many other sharks use bacal pumping, actively drawing water into their mouths and across their gills while resting. Bottom-dwelling species like nurse sharks and wobbegongs spend long periods lying still on the ocean floor, breathing without moving at all. Scientific studies of shark physiology confirm this distinction. Researchers have documented how some species switch between ram ventilation and buccal pumping, depending on activity level, temperature, or oxygen availability. Far from being uniform, shark breathing strategies reflect evolutionary adaptations to different habitats. A striking contrast is that aquariums around the world house species capable of resting motionless, something impossible if all sharks had to swim endlessly. This real-world evidence demonstrates the flexibility of shark biology. The myth persists because the dramatic version, a shark dying instantly if it stops, makes for a simple and memorable story. The fact to remember is that not all sharks need to keep moving. In practice, survival depends on the species and its breathing method, not on perpetual motion. Sharks can smell a single drop of blood from miles away. The dramatic claim that sharks can detect a single drop of blood from miles away has been repeated so often it sounds like fact, but science shows otherwise. This idea spread through sensational media, especially during the mid-20th century, when sharks were portrayed as super predators with almost supernatural senses. Movies like Jaws amplified the myth, suggesting that even the smallest trace of blood could trigger an attack from great distances. The exaggeration made sharks seem more terrifying than biology supports. In reality, sharks do have an extraordinary sense of smell, but it is not limitless. Laboratory studies and field experiments demonstrate that many shark species can detect 1 part of blood in about 25 million parts of water, roughly a few drops in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. While impressive, this sensitivity does not allow them to detect blood across miles of ocean. The concentration dilutes quickly in open water, limiting the range of detection. A striking case study comes from controlled shark research in Florida. When small amounts of fish blood were released, nearby sharks responded quickly, but those farther than a few hundred meters away showed no reaction. Water currents, turbulence, and dilution all play major roles in whether a shark can pick up the scent at all. It is also worth noting that sharks rely on more than smell. They use hearing, vision, and electroreception to locate prey. Smell is important, but it is one part of a broader sensory toolkit rather than a magical long-range detector. The myth endures because the image of a shark sensing a single drop of blood across miles of ocean is vivid and fear-inducing. The fact to remember is that sharks have acute smell within close range, but not across vast distances. In practice, their hunting success depends on proximity, environment, and multiple senses working together. Whales shoot water from their blowholes. The popular image of whales shooting fountains of water from their blowholes has been passed down through illustrations, documentaries, and even children's cartoons. But what looks like a geyser is not water being expelled from inside the whale. This misconception likely spread because the spout resembles a spray of seawater. Early sailors described whale spouts as jets of water, and the term carried into books and popular culture. The imagery stuck, reinforcing the idea that whales somehow store or eject seawater from their bodies. The truth is more physiological. Whales are mammals, not fish, and they breathe air through their blowholes, which are the equivalent of nostrils. When a whale surfaces to exhale, it forcefully pushes out warm air from its lungs. That air is full of water vapor and often mixed with tiny droplets of mucus. When the warm, moist breath meets the cooler air above the ocean, it condenses rapidly into a visible mist. If seawater happens to splash over the blowhole as the whale surfaces, it can be caught in the spray, but it is not being shot out from inside the whale. Scientific observations confirm this. Researchers studying the composition of spout plumes have found they contain respiratory vapor and biological material, not seawater. This distinction is so clear that scientists have even begun using blow sampling to study whale health, analysing the droplets for hormones, DNA, and microbes. The persistence of the myth comes from a simple visual misinterpretation. Mist looks like water, and the ocean provides an easy explanation. But the biology tells another story. The fact to remember is that whales exhale vapor, not water. In practice, this means their spouts are signs of breathing, not fountains spraying from their bodies. The claim that hair and fingernails continue to grow after death has been repeated so often that it sounds believable, but it's an illusion rather than a biological reality. This misconception likely spread because of observations made in the days following death. Undertakers and family members sometimes noticed that a body seemed to have longer nails or more prominent stubble. Without understanding the processes of decomposition, it was easy to assume growth was still occurring. Literature and folklore further dramatized the idea, tying it to eerie images of the dead continuing some trace of life. The truth lies in biology. Once the body dies, blood circulation and oxygen delivery stop. Cells that produce hair and nail growth, such as those in the follicles and nail beds, can't function without oxygen and energy. Scientific studies confirm that hair and nails require active metabolism, something that ceases immediately after death. So why the illusion? After death, the skin loses moisture and begins to shrink. As it pulls back from the hair shafts and nail beds, more of what was already there becomes exposed. This makes nails look longer and stubble appear more pronounced, even though no new growth has occurred. A striking example comes from forensic pathology, where examiners note that this growth is actually a trick of skin retraction, not continued biological activity. The myth persists because the visual effect is convincing, and because the idea of the body continuing in small ways after death is both unsettling and memorable. But science makes the distinction clear. The fact to remember is that hair and nails do not keep growing after death. In practice, what actually matters is that the apparent growth is a result of skin dehydration and shrinkage, not post-mortem life. Camels store water in their humps. The belief that camels store water in their humps has been repeated in classrooms, books, and even cartoons, but it doesn't reflect how camels actually survive in the desert. This misconception likely spread because of the camel's close association with arid environments. Seeing an animal endure days without drinking, combined with the distinctive hump on its back, led travelers and storytellers to assume the hump functioned as a natural water tank. The idea was simple, memorable, and practical for teaching, but scientifically inaccurate. In reality, a camel's hump is a fat reserve, not a reservoir of water. Each hump stores up to 35 kilograms of fat, which can be metabolized into both energy and small amounts of water when food is scarce. This adaptation allows camels to endure long journeys across barren landscapes without needing constant access to vegetation. When the fat reserve is depleted, the hump visibly shrinks or droops, showing its true role as stored nutrition. Camels manage water in other ways. They can drink up to 40 gallons in a single sitting and rehydrate quickly without suffering the shock that would harm most mammals. Their blood cells are oval-shaped rather than round, allowing them to circulate efficiently even when dehydrated. They also minimize water loss by producing concentrated urine and dry feces, and by tolerating body temperature fluctuations that reduce sweating in extreme heat. Scientific studies of camel physiology emphasize these remarkable adaptations, which together explain their desert resilience far better than the myth of water-storing humps. The myth persists because the hump is so visually distinctive and invites a simple explanation. The fact to remember is that camels store fat, not water, in their humps. In practice, this means their survival depends on efficient water use, not hidden reservoirs.